Hi, welcome back, everyone. This is your friend Greedy Fanfics, bringing you another fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the first part of What If Deku Had an Explosion Quirk. All credit for this story goes to our three Na, so please support them by checking out the link in the description for more details. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this. Now, let's get into the fanfic. We can't give up. We have to catch up and get them back. Izuku hollered as Azuri wrapped her tongue around him and the others. Azuri launched Izuku, as well as Shoji and Todoroki, into the air, chasing after Mr. Compress desperately. Mr. Compress had sheltered Bakugo and Tokoemi in his glassy marbles, and he showed no sign of releasing them anytime soon. Azuri catapulted the trio right into Mr. Compress' back, crashing him into the dirt beneath them. With no time left to think, Izuku looked up from Mr. Compress. Indigo flames quickly erupted towards them from their side. "Get back!" Todoroki and Izuku managed to spit out as the flames flashed closer to them. Izuku uses his poorly casted arm to shove Shoji out of Dabi's field of action. The three of them crash into the dirt beneath them, rattling their skulls against the earth. The trio hops back onto their feet as fast as their adrenaline will let them. Todoroki deters Dabi's flames with his ice. He launches a wall of ice towards the villains, giving them a blink of an eye to collect themselves. Todoroki steals a glance behind him to check on Shoji and Midoriya, but is interrupted by Dabi's laughter. Twice and Toga are already launching themselves over the ice wall Todoroki created earlier, ready to strike down the trio. Todoroki extends his right arm like he's aiming his palm in the direction of Dabi, sending more ice his way. The ice trails around Dabi like he's molding Dabi into an ice cube, refraining him from closing in on the trio. Shoji springs into the air where Twice is, landing a kick against his gut. As soon as Shoji creates an impact against Twice's stomach, the muddy remains melt onto Shoji's leg, the particles of what's left of Twice flying across the sky. Izuku couldn't care less about the distractions that had been casted upon them. The only thing he could keep his focus on right now was getting to Katsuki and Tokoemi. They can't waste their time entertaining the villains like this any longer. As Izuku loses track of reality in his clouded thoughts, majorly because of the adrenaline rush and the impact he took to his head earlier, Toga rushes over to him, prancing herself into the air, and tucks her knees into her chest, releasing them once Izuku's torso reaches her proximity. She's able to kick Izuku with the balls of her shoes, thrashing his body back onto the ground. "You'd be cooler if you bled more, Izuku!" Toga giggles as she swims her knife up above Izuku, beginning the ritual she's planned for him. Before Toga could swing her knife down at Izuku, Shoji strikes at Toga's face with his fist, launching her a few meters away from the two of them. With no time to talk, Shoji lends Izuku a hand to help him up as Twice breaks through the ice barrier Todoroki crafted earlier. "Midoriya, Todoroki, we're running away!" Shoji shouts out. Todoroki swings his arm at the villains, and from it erupts a shield of ice that tops over 100 feet. The three of them pivot the opposite way, beginning to sprint away from the action. Milliseconds after beginning the sprint, a magenta void appears amongst them. The same villain from the USJ. Todoroki chokes out. "Warp!" Izuku exclaims. "Let us go, Dabi." Mr. Compress chuckles from behind them. He taunts his tongue out at them, the marbles that possess Tokoemi and Bakugo on the periphery of his lip. Izuku rushes towards Mr. Compress before he could realize his legs were moving. He stops in his tracks, his shoes digging into the dirt beneath his feet, the moment a twinkling laser beams at Mr. Compress' face. The marbles dance in the back of Mr. Compress' throat, forcing him to spit them out shortly after. Todoroki and Midoriya are the first ones to dash towards them, attempting to grab them. Dabi appears before Todoroki in a flash, snatching the marble Todoroki reached for right as it grazed his fingertips. However, the moment Izuku touches the marble, he becomes engulfed into the marble prison, taking Tokoemi's place. Tokoemi tumbles onto the ground, finally released into the real world once again, his eyes fluttering in and out of consciousness. Twice steals away the marble with Izuku in it, heading into the portal as he giggles to Toga. "That kid was a pain to deal with." Twice complains to Toga as he playfully nudges her shoulder with his. I'm sad he pushed me off. I was so close to getting some of my sweet Izuku's blood, humph. Toga crosses her arms, pouting at Twice as she nudges him back. The League of Villains all vanish swiftly thanks to Kurojire's portal. The portal cuts back to their secret hideout, the bar in Kamino. Mr. Compress smirks cheerfully as Dabi and Twice approach him. Your fuck-up resulted pretty well for us, how'd you manage that? Dabi chuckles as he slips the marble with Bakugo into his palm. A great magician never reveals his tricks. Mr. Compress weaves the marble with Bakugo around his fingers, fiddling with it. All that matters is that we have both of the problem children now, who'd expect that? However, it'll sure be a pain to deal with this one. Mr. Compress then catches the marble Twice had thrown at him with ease, the one with Midoriya inside. Izuku Midoriya HM? The annoyingly heroic one. Quite a pain on the battlefield, but the boss could use him for something. Mr. Compress shrugged as he slipped the 2 marbles into his pocket. Go fetch the Quirk anesthetics, we'll give it to them once I release them. Mr. Compress shrugged as Twice prepared the anesthetics. Spinner, knock them out as soon as I release them. Mr. Compress instructed as the rest of the league gathered around him. Twice clutched the bundle of ropes. Dabi leaned against the brick wall near the corner as he watched from afar. Toga held the syringes with the Quirk anesthetics in her hands. Spinner stood directly in front of Mr. Compress with his sword in the air, and Mr. Compress held the marbles out and ready to drop them. On the count of 3, everyone. You know how rowdy these 2 are. Mr. Compress giggled as he squeezed the marbles once more. The league nodded, adjusting their position. 1, 2, 3. Mr. Compress released the tension in his palm, letting the marbles ripple onto the ground as Katsuki and Izuku appeared before them once again. Before the pair could process anything, the back of Spinner's sword is thrusted onto the nape of their necks, knocking them out instantly. Toga shuffles down to her knees as she injects Izuku's veins with the Quirk anesthetic first, then shortly after repeats for Katsuki. Twice joins her on the ground and begins tying Izuku. Twice tools at the rope, then back at Toga. His eye bounces up as he lifts an eyebrow at her, shrugging slightly. Toga shrugs back at him, looking at the rope as she looks around the bar. You're awful at this. Why'd you volunteer if you don't even know how to do your damn job? Dabi's voice sharpens as he watches Twice and Toga helplessly look around. Sheesh, then you do it then. Twice bobs his finger at Dabi. Dabi walks over to them, then kneels onto the ground. Move! Dabi shoves Twice out of the way, then snatches the rope out of Twice's hands. He ties Izuku's entire body until his actual body is barely visible, until the areas that are visible turn white. He repeats on Bakugo. With the leftover rope, he decides to simply tie the 2 together. Dabi rises up from his knees, dusting off his hands as he turns to look at the rest of the league. Twice pouts at Dabi as he and Toga sit on the bar stools. Isn't that a bit overkill? Twice throws attitude at Dabi, staring down at Toga's pink, bedazzled flip phone as they play Tetris. Dabi simply scoffs at Twice's comment as he melts onto the empty booth. Izuku and Katsuki sit on the wooded ground tied up against each other, still unconscious. Katsuki's back rests on Izuku's back, their hands tied together, unable to face one another. Katsuki is the first to wake up. His eyes flutter open, not causing a scene. Slowly gaining consciousness, Katsuki's eyes widen at the realization of the situation he's in. The memories of what occurred only a few hours ago flood in, finally grasping what happened while he was unconscious. Despite this shattering realization, his breath remains stable, keeping quiet despite the slight panic. Katsuki knows better than to cause a scene with all the villains laying around the bar, sleeping. This could be an advantage. All the villains are asleep. If he just uses the clusters from his quirk to burn off the rope tied against his rye. It'd be a lie to say his heart didn't drop when he realized someone was resting against his backside. The texture of the hair tickling the nape of his neck told him everything he needed to know about the person, because there was only one person he knew with hair as messy, untamed, and overgrown as the one against his neck. It was Deku, and that pissed him off more than ever before. Deku was probably the last person who should be here. He had All Might's power. At least he was pretty sure he did. There were way too many pieces of evidence to back up his claim. If the villains found out, this could be really bad. So bad. Not to mention, with Deku here, he can't just blow everyone to hell and back and run, because now he also has to focus on getting himself and Deku out safely. What a pain. He wiggles his torso, gently hitting Izuku's back with his. The tight ropes made it difficult to move around freely, so this would have to do. Katsuki rotated his neck as best as he could towards the direction of the wall, just in case the villains were awake, so he could whisper to Deku and somehow wake him up. It takes a few more nudges and a few more whispers before Izuku gains consciousness. In contrast to Katsuki, Izuku attempts to jump forward the moment he gains consciousness. His eyes bounce open, and his torso dashes forward quickly. This sudden movement tugs on Katsuki's rope, inflicting a burning sensation from the rope against grazing his skin. Katsuki hisses at the pain, and then turns to Izuku again. "Shut up, Deku. You're going to wake them up with your noisy ass," Katsuki whispers. Most people would think he's speaking gently, but Izuku could hear the irritation in Katsuki's tone. "Sorry, Kaken," Izuku whispers back a little louder than Katsuki as he wiggles his wrist against Katsuki's. "Do you not know how to whisper? Shut up or do it properly." Bakugo moves his torso forwards, then slams it back, and just like Izuku had done earlier, except with even more force. Even if the situation was serious, Katsuki couldn't refrain from his habit of getting revenge. Izuku rolled his eyes. "I do know, it's a little harder when you have a concussion though." Izuku responds quieter, snarkier, than last time, taking Katsuki's complaint into account. Katsuki breathed out an annoyed sigh, then silence arose again. The two used this time to analyze the situation. Izuku also noticed how advantageous this time could be for them if they use it correctly. Shigaraki seems to be the only person missing from the bar, while the rest of the villains sleep in the cushioned booths, so they're out of sight. The only person who isn't asleep in a booth is Dabi, who moved because he got uncomfortable, and happens to be asleep with his head resting on the wooden bar countertop. There are multiple problems when it comes to an escape plan, though. They could just use Kaken's quirk to disintegrate the rope that ties them together, but there's a possibility of his quirk making noise. Kaken has a good, no, he has mastered his quirk, there's no doubt about that. He doesn't have any problem controlling it. However, a factor that he cannot control is the sound that erupts from his quirk. Even a few sparks could have an outlier. One spark could end up being louder than all the others, causing the villains to wake up. It all depends on how sweaty Kaken is. If one bead of his sweat, the nitroglycerin droplets, is bigger than the rest, it could completely backfire on them before they even get out of the ropes. Another hazard would be his emotional state. Kaken could be more nervous than usual, hence, causing him to sweat more in a shorter amount of time. This factor could also contribute to the sound hazard. The rhythm of his heartbeat is yet another thing to be cautious of. The more nervous Kaken is, the harder it is to control the density of his power. Even if they did get out successfully, the door could make a loud creak, or the door could even lead somewhere deeper into the facility. Right now, they don't have any information on where this bar is located, and if it's not a part of a more complex structure. So in other terms, right now, this plan is a no-go. Not until they had more information. If they wanted to go with the more abrasive plan, Izuku could activate full cowling, break the ropes all at once, punch in the direction of the villains, and use the aftermath wind to give them a few seconds to punch through the wall they're currently against and run. But, "Keep it down, you're rambling. I hate when you do that shit," Bakugo whispered. "First of all, the front door locked not only from the outside, but from the inside. I don't know where the other doors lead, but our best bet is the front door. Before those bastards knocked us out completely, I was able to catch a glimpse at the front door. The front door leads outside, I know that for fucking sure." Izuku glanced once again at the front door. Kaken was right, there was a lock. It wasn't like a normal door lock either, it looked more like a lock you'd put on a locker. which meant there was either a master key that could open every door in this facility, or a different code for every lock, if they had thrown out the key for safety measures. But that means the villains also can't get out. Why are they keeping them here? Izuku whispers back, questioning Katsuki. The lock isn't for them, dumbass. They probably know the code. They aren't stupid enough to sleep peacefully while the door is in plain sight. It could also be so no one breaks in. Katsuki looks at the wooden tiles as he explains to Izuku. Shigaraki and the warp villain are missing. Izuku adds as he observes the room. Yeah, I noticed earlier. It's pissing me the hell off. Katsuki grunts quietly. If Shigaraki was the only one missing, that wouldn't be too much of a problem. I'd assume he was most likely captured by the pros because he doesn't have any fast mobility quirks. But the fact that both the warp villain and Shigaraki are missing is a problem. The warp villain wouldn't be missing unless he was taking Shigaraki somewhere else, somewhere he has business being. The warp villain follows his orders, he goes wherever Shigaraki goes. Our classmates could still be in danger. Izuku mutters as he continues to eye the bar down. Deku. Izuku freezes at the tone of Katsuki's voice, despite it still being a barely audible whisper. I can't use my quirk. Bakugo whispers sharply as Izuku lets the words hang in the air before digesting them. Izuku attempts to activate One for All, but it's just as Katsuki said, he can't activate it. This sends Izuku's heart to the bottommost pit of his stomach. What had happened when they were unconscious? Actually, scratch that. How long had they been unconscious for? And why can't they use their quirks? Okay, think. He had actually read about this sometime before he got his quirk, the days where he spent all his free time analyzing quirks instead of training one like everyone else. He's read about this stuff ever since he was a kid. There was an investigation he'd stumbled across while looking for a school project. It was on the new black market, the silver market, single-handedly increasing the rates of sex trafficking by using quirk-reducing drugs. Izuku got sidetracked and ditched the search for an article on pre-Quirk-era politics and read the entire investigation up instead. How was the silver market different from the black market? Well, the difference was that the silver market wasn't easily attainable. The rise of heroes, even ones like All Might, also meant more villains, despite it being the era of peace. As much as Izuku admired All Might, he knew that Japan was far from the era of peace, at least when it came to issues below the surface level. Of course, it's the calmest it's ever been in Japan for decades, but it didn't mean other issues weren't brewing up where nobody could see them. The silver market was much harder to attain. You had to know the right people, and these people were almost always wealthy, powerful figures in society. A low-grade villain wasn't capable of getting in, even if they wanted to. The exchange of weapons, people, and drugs was a common factor in both markets. However, what made the new one so dangerous was the fact that quirks were a predominant factor in the silver market. High-value quirks are worth more than money nowadays. They're the cheat code to becoming filthy wealthy. One of the easiest examples to point out could be the Heroes Commission. Ever since the era of quirks began, the government has been sending a disgusting percentage of tax dollars to the Heroes Commission, rather than the military or other branches in society. To put that into perspective, the Japanese military had only put 3% of their tax dollars into the military pre-Quirk era. Now, however, a whole 7% of tax dollars were being put into the Heroes Commission alone, lowering the military percentage to lower than 1%. The United States hadn't even gone to that extent. They simply evened out the military and their Heroes Commission tax distribution to 50-50. Japan had gone above and beyond, becoming one of the most developed countries when it came to quirks. Not only that, but the Heroes Commission has copyright to every single piece of Japanese hero merchandise you'll ever buy. It's no surprise they're as powerful as, if not more powerful than, the government. Back to the point. The investigation focused on one of the bigger organizations involved within the silver market. Apparently, they had been able to get away with sex and human trafficking for almost half a century because of the quirk drugs they had created throughout the years. At first, the people involved found a way to exploit their own quirks, but then it turned into exploiting the quirks of people they trafficked. Some people would even donate their own Quirk DNA for a hefty amount of money, an amount that could last them until retirement and beyond. The process was quite simple. The Quirk user's blood would be drawn, the amount differing on how long you want the drug to last. It'd be mixed into other drugs, most commonly sleep anesthetics, then injected into the bloodstream. Izuku had always heard rumors about Quirk exploitation ever since he was a kid. He would fall for the Quirk supplement scams, fraudulent Quirk purchasing, Quirk manifestation schemes, any type of swindle that had introduced him to the opportunity of possessing Quirk. These organizations would create drugs that had the same abilities as Quirks, making it easier to spread a Quirk deemed helpful by organizations. Quirk drugs made it easier to traffic people quietly, but also helped the organizations make a disgusting amount of money from the drugs alone. One of the articles he read up on was all about the drugs created by the organization caught, one of the drugs possessing the ability to temporarily paralyze, or in other words, numb, a Quirk from its user. This is where the main headline of the article came from. These Quirk drugs had the ability to remove a person's self-defense system in an instant, creating a rise in sex trafficking. Izuku popped out of his thoughts after a few moments, much calmer than before. Katsuki wouldn't ever admit it, but Katsuki knew Izuku could sense he was on edge. "It's a Quirk drug," Izuku whispered reassuringly to Katsuki. As each syllable flowed off Izuku's tongue, Katsuki's tensed muscles relaxed against Izuku's back. "I was watching the villains earlier when you were looking over at the door, and one of their phones received a notification, so the screen lit up. It was on the booth table, but there was a big mirror on the wall next to the booth. I was just barely able to see the reflection, but I found out that currently, it's almost 10:30. That means it's been at least almost 24 hours since we've been separated from our class, considering it was 11 at night when we were taken. I kinda connected the pieces. I got a concussion, broke my arms, and had an adrenaline rush, so it would be likely for me to sleep that long. But that's where it wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't be asleep for that long. It's also strange how we woke up at the same time even if you did wake me up a few minutes early. And I know none of the villains have a Quirk to paralyze or steal a Quirk, so I came to the conclusion that it's a Quirk drug. The huge amount of sleep is usually the sign that you've been under a Quirk drug. It's because Quirk drugs are also heavy sleep anesthetics." Izuku took a breath after he finished his wordy ramble. "So what you're saying is that it'll eventually wear off?" Katsuki questioned Izuku quietly. "Yeah, even faster if you have a certain blood type." Izuku nods, his head gently rubbing against Katsuki's every time he moves his head. "I have type O, so mine is gonna wear off a lot slower than someone with type A." Izuku continues. "So mine is gonna wear off soon because I'm A. Fucking finally?" Katsuki questions. "Yeah, but in the meantime, we have to do something. We don't know when the League will eventually wake up, so we have to act fast." "No shit, you don't have to tell me. I'm not an idiot." Katsuki rolls his eyes, furrowing his brows. "First, we have to get the hell out of these ropes. I counted while you drifted off into Ramble World. I'm tied with one rope. By that, I'm assuming you're also tied with one rope, and then there's one rope that ties us together. I say we untie the rope that ties us together first so we can move our hands." "I think so too, but Kaken, I think my rope is tied too tight for that." Izuku is only able to wiggle the tip of his fingers against Katsuki's. Katsuki flinches at the contact. "Stop doing that! It feels weird." Katsuki moves his fingers to hold Izuku's to stop him. Izuku can feel Katsuki's back trembling on his back. Izuku's mind goes blank. Not for any serious reason, but because he's never seen Katsuki act like this before. He has no idea why Katsuki's shaking, and why he was so startled by his sudden hand movement. It's strange, but not in a bad way. Then, Izuku connected the dots. "Kaken, are your hands ticklish?" Izuku whispered ever so quietly, the sides of his mouth perking upwards. Yeah, so stop doing that shit unless you want to give us away." Katsuki screamed at Izuku. Well, scream whispered anyways. Katsuki released Izuku's fingers, and Izuku didn't fiddle with his hands again for their own safety. He couldn't help but chuckle despite the situation, though. Izuku and Katsuki sat in silence for a few seconds, hypothesizing another way to escape. Then, Izuku's eyes widened. "Kaken, I know what to do." "Oh my gosh, how did I not think of this before?" Izuku mutters. "Just spit it out, I'm itching to get out of this shit already." Katsuki let out a quiet, annoyed grunt. "Help me undo my casts. Once they're off, the rope will loosen." Izuku turned to whisper to Katsuki. Before Izuku had been taken by the villains, he had fought too recklessly and emotionally, causing him to overdo one for all and breaking his arms. One of his friends had used their shirt to cast away the bleeding temporarily. His hazy memory forbade him to remember who it was, but he was eternally grateful to whichever one of his classmates had done him this favor. Katsuki didn't respond, but instead started right away. Izuku would move his hands as best as he could so Katsuki could unravel his casts quickly. They eventually undid the first cast, letting one of Izuku's arms freely move around. Once the second cast was undone, Izuku had full range of motion in his arms again. Izuku turned to face Katsuki now that his ropes were basically undone because of how much the ropes around him had loosened. Izuku slowly rotated Katsuki's body towards his direction. "TCH." Katsuki let out a complaint the moment he finally met eye-to-eye with Izuku. "Why'd you have to be the one let out first?" Katsuki whispered. "Just be grateful that one of us even got out, Kaken," Izuku responded as he narrowed his eyes at Katsuki. Izuku tried undoing Katsuki's knot, but it was just too tight. Katsuki didn't have any sort of extra room like Izuku because of his casts, so it felt impossible to get Katsuki out with nothing but his bare hands. Izuku hissed as the rope grazed the finger that had slipped off while undoing the knot, sparking up a pain that burned as if he had touched an open flame. He put the finger in his mouth, then took it out, shaking it, as he tried to ease the pain. Katsuki appeared equally as frustrated. "Hurry this shit up, this rope's gonna cut off my circulation," Katsuki complained to Izuku as he wiggled in the rope. "I'm trying." Izuku returns Katsuki's attitude as he continues to undo the knot. Suddenly, Izuku stops to grip his head as he quietly groans in pain. The ringing in his ears echoes through his head, scraping at his skull each second longer it goes on. His vision begins to blur in and out of darkness. Izuku shakes himself out of it, hoping it'll help. "Deku, I swear to don't you dare pull these garbage symptoms right now. Keep untying me," Katsuki quietly demands, but to Izuku it feels more like a plea. Izuku glances around the room again, and he concentrates on the wine glass on the bar counter. Before he knows it, Izuku is on his feet, slightly wobbly, and heading to grab it. "What the fuck are you doing, Deku? Get back here!" Katsuki screams as he frantically looks into the direction of the villains, then back at Izuku. Izuku manages to grab the wine glass, shuffle back to Katsuki, and plop back onto the ground in front of him. Izuku uses his physical strength to break a small piece of the wine glass off, then begins sawing at the rope Katsuki is enveloped in, freeing him soon after. The rope pops open as the piece of glass saws through the ropes, the remains sliding down Katsuki's body. His first reaction is to move his neck and arms joints in small circles, stretching his stiff muscles. Izuku shuffles onto his knees, preparing to get up, until Katsuki grabs the back of his shirt and drags him back down, whispering into his ear. "Stop deciding shit on your own. Now we have to find the code to the lock if we want to get out of here," Katsuki whispered as he pointed to the door. "We can't go through the front door. The only way we're gonna find the code is if we look through the villain's things. That's way too risky. What if they wake up? It's better to just go through one of the other rooms." Izuku pointed towards the two other doors, one on the left wall of the front door, one on the right wall. "Alright, nerd, since you know everything, what's gonna happen if they're both dead ends, Katsuki responds back sarcastically. "Then I guess we'll have to find the code after that. There's no harm in checking all our possibilities." Izuku frowns, his brows knitting together as he returns Katsuki's mannerism. "You stuck up, dash." The two of them freeze, their eyes widening at the same time as they hear the front door rattle against the lock. Both of them have the same idea. prancing onto their feet as they grab a few bottles of alcohol as they rush, as quietly as possible, to the two other doors besides the front door. Bakugo, being behind Izuku, heads to the opposite door while Izuku isn't looking. Izuku whispers something to the Katsuki behind him when he enters the lounge room on the right of the bar, only to notice he's not there. Izuku peeks his head back out the door and calls out to Katsuki as quietly as he is able to be. "Kaken! What are you doing? Come here!" Izuku whispers angrily as he waves his hand, whipping it frantically, in a way to encourage Katsuki to come to his side. "No! If we're both together, the villains can catch us easily. I'll take them by surprise and then dash." Katsuki is cut off by the door rattling once again, this time someone knocking. Izuku's stomach churns as he is left with no other choice but to separate from Katsuki. The League of Villains shuffle against the plastic cushions as they begin to gain consciousness. Izuku slips back into the darkness of the lounge room, while Katsuki has no choice but to hide in the room opposite of Izuku. The one situation Izuku was desperately trying to avoid, just great. The first villain to awake is Twice. He drags his body out of the booth while he grunts, struggling to slide out of the cranny space. He glides his hand across the table as his eyes flutter open to complete consciousness, reaching to get a feel at where his phone is. Once he gained his stance, and his phone, he led himself to the door, not bothering to glance over to where Katsuki and Izuku were once tied up. "Now who the hell?" Twice yawns and scratches his head, removing the lock once placed between the lock clasp and peeks the door open. Twice's attitude switches like a light. His chest rises up as a smile morphs itself onto his mouth. He swings his arms up into the air, cheering as he welcomes the figures outside the door. "Boss! Kurogiri!" Twice squeals as he shuffles to the side of the door frame, making room to let the two in. Izuku runs a palm over his mouth to avoid any shaky breaths, loud gulps, or sudden hiccups escaping, including his rambles. His heart begins stomping on his ribcage, so much so that it begins to feel like he'll puke his heart out of his esophagus. Or that his ribs will begin to act like a bell, ringing every time his heart pounds on the periphery of his bones. Or that the ringing created will echo up and out of his ears, letting the villains listen to the leaks of his anxiety. "Hey, where are the kids I told you to bring back?" Shigaraki pivots to face Twice. "You mean those tiny UA kids? Come on, it's not a big deal." Twice slowly rotates to where the remains of the rope lay. "Oh no! Oh no, oh no, oh no! Damn it! Where'd they go?" Twice yells as he points at the cut-up ropes at the back of the bar. This crisis results in the rest of the League waking up. The League was more irritated over Twice's complaints rather than the pair escaping. An order was an order, no emotional inclination towards whatever they were sent to do. "Ugh, just look around and stop shitting yourself over something so obviously trivial. They're bound to be somewhere in here. It's not like they could have gone anywhere." Dobby swings his face back into the fold of his arms that rested on the bar table. "Yeah, the front door is the only way out. There's nowhere else my Izuku could have gone, especially when they're under that silly drug," Toga adds as she skips over to Twice's side. Izuku's heart won't stop pounding. Not only are they stuck in dead ends, but they were also separated from one another. They were going to be found, and they didn't have a quirk, nor a plan. Shigaraki grunts. "Whatever, we can deal with that later. What's more important is that I brought the boss." If Izuku's heart wasn't already escaping his chest, then it was definitely close to falling through his stomach now. Before the villains even revealed any information on who the boss was, Izuku could feel it. The connection between One for All and All for One wasn't anything relatively close to a bond or a connection, but rather they shared so many similarities and experiences. He could sense it. All for One was here, and the pair found themselves in a 7 versus 2 with absolutely no way to defend themselves. "Then get moving, you're talking freely as if you haven't already given them a head start," Mr. Compress added as he flicked his hand out, leaning on the bar counter. The League groaned as they began the search. Toga and Twice looked bent down behind the bar counter. Dobby stayed asleep on the wooden table. Spinner checked the extra booth seats. Mr. Compress faked looking around, and Shigaraki stayed with all for one. With every step they took, Izuku's heart rattled further and further up his throat. Think! Think! Izuku's eyes raced around the dim room. It was a small lounge. Inside it were 2 long leather couches, a coffee table, a television, and a karaoke machine equipped with 2 microphones. Hiding under the couches? No go. Way too simple and lame. Barricading himself didn't seem like a bad idea, especially because he has a good amount of physical strength from the training All Might put him through. The problem with that is that it would take just a few seconds too long to put the couches in place. Plus, the villains could easily break the door open anyways, and it would leave him cornered. Best decision? Hit and run. Izuku grabbed the karaoke machine and snuck to the side of the door frame. He hadn't forgotten about the handful of alcohol bottles he'd grabbed earlier. He set them down on the ground next to him and waited patiently until the villains entered the lounge room. This was his plan. The moment the villains opened the door, or went far enough in, Izuku would fling the karaoke machine onto their heads, throw the alcohol bottles at any other villain in his way, call Kaken over, and run out of the front door. The echo of the villains' footsteps decreased each second and became clearer, meaning they were approaching. It shook through Izuku's bones. Normally, something like this wouldn't have stirred him up, but in this situation, everything was different. Izuku remembers the first and last time he attacked a villain quirkless. In fact, it was barely over a year ago. Kaken had been attacked by the sludge villain. As ashamed as he is to admit it, Izuku hesitated. He ended up rushing at the sludge villain to save Kaken despite the fact, of course he did. Kaken was his friend, no matter what Kaken may think. He would do it again in a heartbeat. However, that same hesitation haunts him. The feeling of entering death's door willingly was something he never thought he could end up doing because of growing up without a quirk. He was applauded for his courage, so much so that All Might gave him his quirk. Like seriously, All Might. But fighting quirkless was undoubtedly horrifying. Fighting quirkless was a reality check. He'd realized that maybe becoming a hero wasn't going to work out, that maybe it was time to be more realistic. Izuku hadn't hesitated to act without fear or hesitation ever since he got his quirk, but without it, he felt defenseless. No matter how strong he may have become, no matter how many moves All Might had taught him, no matter how many strategy lessons Mr. Aizawa had given him, Izuku was scared. And that was okay. Smiling in the face of fear is the true essence of being a hero. Yeah, it was going to be fine. The villains' voices finally arrived right outside Izuku's door. They slowly creaked open the door, muffled whispers leaking into the room. Before Izuku could even think of hesitating, he raised the karaoke machine above his head, and with all of his force, thrusted it back down onto Toga and Twice's heads, catapulting the karaoke machine so hard at them Izuku swore he could hear the cracking sound of the machine creating impact with their skulls. Izuku quickly kneeled down to swiftly collect the few alcohol bottles on the ground, heading to the front door. Kaken! Izuku screamed out to Katsuki in the other room. As Izuku ran through the front door frame, a rough palm clasped around his forearm, dragging him back inside. Before the hand could thrash him onto the ground, Izuku rotated his torso, swinging his left arm like a boomerang, and shattered the alcohol bottles against Dabi's head. Izuku's feet stumbled as Dabi's grip became absent, then pivoted once again. Spinner dashed towards, his sword inching higher into the air, preparing to crush Izuku underneath. With barely enough time to process the movement from the corner of his eye, Izuku dodged the laser-like sword and shattered 2 bottles of alcohol against Spinner's gut. Twice was finally back on his feet, blood gushing from his head while Toga still laid on the ground, and pummeled Izuku headfirst onto the wooden tiles. Izuku let out a yelp as the back of his head kanonied onto the ground. He bobbed his head up to find Katsuki revealing himself from the darkness. "You fucking bastards!" Katsuki brought up his palms and began blasting explosions at the villains. He glanced down at Izuku, then glared back up to roundhouse Dabi with his leg. "Get up, Deku!" Katsuki exclaimed as he dodged Toga's blades, then landed an explosive punch on Mr. Compress. Izuku wobbled up and dashed to the door as Katsuki added a finishing blow. Just as they headed out the door frame, a foreign hand grasped Katsuki's blonde hair, inching him back inside as Katsuki snapped his hands up to his scalp, hissing in pain. "Kaken!" Izuku hollered as he followed Katsuki back inside. Katsuki kicked his legs around like fins and dug his fingernails into the foreign hand on his scalp, scratching and exploding as much skin as he could, attempting to break free from the man's grasp. Izuku reached his arm out to Katsuki, attempting to steal back a hold on his wrist so he could drag Katsuki back into his possession. In a singular moment, Izuku was back on the ground. Twice locked his arms stiff, his fingertips planting themselves firmly onto his scalp, and his other hand squeezing his wrists together. "I said get the fuck off, you hag!" Katsuki screamed at the man as he blasted another explosion in the direction of All for One's face. The man gripped his head in a singular hand, as if he was holding a ball. Shigaraki smiled to himself as he watched the scene unfold. "Bakugo Katsuki!" called Shigaraki. He approached Bakugo, meeting him eye to eye. "What do you say about joining the League of Villains?" The other members of the League gathered around to watch, cleaning the blood off themselves. "You've got the spirit of a villain within you, what did you say?" The tight silence was shattered by Katsuki's hysterical laughter. "Please, I'd never join your League of Losers," Katsuki replied as he grinned ear to ear, his brows furrowing together so tightly they could snap off any second, his eyes twitching wider. Before it could become completely silent once again, the background sound of the television leaked into the main bar area. Both Izuku and Bakugo recognized the voice immediately. It was the sound of Mr. Aizawa's voice. "Katsuki Bakugo's attitude may be misleading, but take my word, there's nobody who wants to become a hero more than him. The villains are horribly mistaken if they think they could convince Bakugo Katsuki to join them." Bakugo's grin morphed into a toothy smirk. "Hear that? Ha, I guess the teachers know me better than I thought. I'll drop dead before I join you bastards." Shigaraki looked around, then shrugged. "A shame, really. Well, I guess you're gonna have to drop dead then." At that moment, a nebula-like cloud with a blood-written shade began leaking out of All for One's palm, and in that instance, Katsuki began throwing a tantrum. He waved his legs and arms frantically, his huffs of frustration becoming more evident. The more time that went on with the cloudy smoke injecting itself into his head, the weaker his explosions became. Twice whispered upwards to Dabi as he held Izuku down. "He means metaphorically dead, right? Get the fuck off of me! What are you doing, damn it? Deku, get up! I told you, get the fuck up! Shit! Ugh!" Izuku can only stay paralyzed as he watches Katsuki struggle against All for One from below. His head feels as if it's splitting open, his body is running on pure adrenaline, his ears are ringing and echoing back into his skull, his vision is becoming blurry from all the tears flooding the creases of his eyes. He can't make out a clear thought. "Kaken, no!" Izuku wails once again. Katsuki flops onto the ground next to Izuku like a carcass. He lays there silently, then drifts off into sleep. "Don't overreact, boy. I only took his quirk, he's fine." All for One flicks his wrist as he shrugs. "But you're coming with me." He points to Izuku as he signals Kurogiri to open up an escape portal. Izuku wanted nothing more than to fight at that moment, but his body could not keep up with his demands any longer. He flows in and out of consciousness as he watches Kaken's body become shrink while being stolen away. Katsuki awakes once again. However, this time he's chained to a chair. The League sits there and almost observes him as he regains consciousness. Shigaraki sighs, then gets back onto the balls of his feet and walks up to him once again. "So let me ask you once more, Bakugo Katsuki, will you join the League of Villains?" Shigaraki's lips tug upwards, so much so that it appears like they'll crack open due to the dehydration visible in his face. It pisses Bakugo off. It pisses him off that someone thinks they can threaten him and he'll back down. It pisses him off beyond any pent-up rage he's ever felt before in his life. "And where the hell is Deku?" Katsuki chuckles as he stares Shigaraki straight into the eyes. "Go throw yourself into incoming traffic." Before Shigaraki could open his mouth to respond to Katsuki's violent comment, someone knocks on the front door. Pizza delivery, the man announces from outside the door. The League looks around in puzzled silence, trying to figure out who ordered pizza. Before they could open the agenda for discussion, All Might crashes through the wall, the layered brick wall crumbling down near Katsuki's feet. I am here! All Might and the other pro-heroes flood in, ready to take down the League. All Might snaps the chain Bakugo is enveloped in, then uses his firm palm to pat him on the back as Bakugo takes a stand. Young Bakugo, you must have been scared. Everything's okay N. All Might scans the room for Izuku, but he's nowhere to be seen. Katsuki notices his analytical gaze, and so Katsuki decides to cut the tension-filled silence with his own lips. They took Deku, they took him. As soon as Katsuki spits the words out into the open air, barely a quavered whisper, he truly digests the severity of the whole situation. He wants to swallow the words back up, choke on them, let them become flavorless, anything to halt the pit of nausea arising in his stomach. Izuku slowly gains consciousness. His nerves tingle at how icy the floor feels against his bare back. Goosebumps trail down his spine as he flutters his eyes open and closed. His fingers twitch with every blink. All at once, the pain flooded him back into his senses. The sensation of his world, his hearing, vision, thoughts, splitting. At this rate, his broken arms had become numb to any pain at all. There was no light as far as Izuku could tell. White noise echoed through the layers of concrete his body rested upon. Izuku almost managed to fall back into unconsciousness. That was until his eyes twitched back open, alerted by the sound of dress shoes clicking against the ground. The sound stopped. At the same time, a man revealed himself by appearing in his visual field, leaning right above his head. It was All for One. Young boy, it's about time you've awakened. All for One states, checking his watch as he shrugs. I don't have much time, so I'll make this quick. He then bobs his head right back out of Izuku's plane of sight. Izuku's eardrums began to tingle at the rattling and clicking noises being created from a few feet beyond him. He fights his eyelids every time they kiss his waterline, resting there for too long. He knows that if he lets himself close his eyes, it could be the last time he wakes up in a long, long time. I didn't realize it beforehand, but your power is quite interesting. Izuku's body tenses up as he waits for All for One to continue. Unfortunately, your little friend's quirk didn't live up to my expectations. I can't get myself to work it in the way he does. A shame, isn't it? All for One chuckles to himself as he continues to wheel around an object a few feet near Izuku. An acquaintance of mine filled me in on your power, and I'm quite intrigued. I thought about taking it while you were fast asleep, but I don't have enough quirk memory to inherit yours. Makes me sad. That kid's quirk takes up a hefty amount of my quirk memory. The volume is too high. It's a bit irritating when it's such a useless quirk. All for One laughed it off, but Izuku felt something snap within himself. Before he knew it, his power activated itself. Strings of his power flowed from his fingertips, letting himself swing around the cave as he attempted to attack All for One. He had managed to get a hold on All for One's limbs, the stringlets of pure power knotting themselves around his joints so firmly he could snap them into two. That was it. He had unlocked Black Whip. He had no idea how, though. All for One let his laughter echo through the cave as he looked down his arm, observing the power that he became entangled in. If I can't have your quirk, why don't you work under me, HM? Use it for me. All for One smirked at him as he raised his arms up. Never. Izuku responded sharply, his black whip tightening around All for One's limbs. All for One dipped his head down to the crook of his neck, then let out a small huff. Well then. I guess you wouldn't want to throw away that hero spirit of yours for nothing. How about this? I can give you whatever you desire if you work for me. All for One's words became smooth and concise like a song, as if there was a rhythm tying the syllables of his words together when they slid off his tongue. He continued persuasively, but Izuku couldn't help but zone out. Izuku's eyes blossomed back open as his state of mind flew up and over All for One, entering his cloud of thoughts. Tempting, huh? All for One let out a chuckle as he observed Izuku's expression softening. I don't want anything. Izuku couldn't, and wouldn't, focus on anything else right now except Katsuki. How could All For One say that a quirk as amazing as Kaken's was useless? He just didn't know how to use it. Kaken had obviously mastered his quirk. He'd spent his entire lifetime dedicated to the practice of mastering it. And secondly, what exactly did All For One mean when he discussed quirk memory? Why does he keep bringing it up? There wasn't any way All For One was going to let him off the hook easily, though. This is a generational villain with a master plan. He wasn't just going to set a hostage free for no reason. He knows how to use his pawns, and won't hesitate to throw some off the board if they have no purpose to him. But he would never just let a pawn off the board, he would have to dispose of it. So he thought back. Was there something he wanted in this instance that could be realistic enough? He needed to create a paradox within his hero ideology, one that you could trace reasonably if you dug far enough in. And then he understood. Give me Kaken's quirk, Izuku muttered. What was that? All For One teased, putting his palm behind his ear, requesting. Izuku repeats his request once more. Give me Katsuki Bakugo's quirk, Izuku demanded. Sudden change of heart? I don't buy it. All For One shrugged. Well, he couldn't say he was surprised. All For One wouldn't believe the sudden switch of morality with no prior knowledge of the requester's drive, especially because he seemed like the more heroic one of the two. He needed to create a backstory, and fast. Izuku panned back to the moments in his life where he could have turned into someone completely different. He thought about the hero comics he read about. He thought about all the vigilantes he had grown up researching, the heroes he grew up admiring, and the villains he grew up contemplating. Why would All For One believe Izuku Midoriya needed Bakugo Katsuki's quirk? The backstory was almost too easy to fabricate. The hard part was selling it. Because I want him to look at the person he looks most down upon, and realize they've stolen every trait that makes him great. Izuku spat out. Well, that doesn't sound very heroic. All For One chuckles. I still want to be a hero, I just don't want him to become one with me. I can't stand it after everything he's done. Izuku's body cringing at the statement. But you already have a quirk, boy. All For One added. You're right, but this can also be beneficial to you. You were talking about quirk memory, right? How you're unable to use Kaken's quirk because of the lack of control you have with it. All it does is take up space, but if I receive it, I'll know how to use it. I've been watching him all my life. I'll master it faster than anyone. Then it won't go to waste. Izuku stared directly at All For One. All For One stared back silently. I'll only join on one more condition, though. I don't want to kill anyone, Izuku replied. Well, I suppose I couldn't expect too much from a hero kid. I applaud you, you have a talent for analyzing. Very impressive, you correctly guessed what my quirk memory was. I'll let you work under my wing. And I'll give you that boy's quirk, it's useless to me anyways. What I want from you, though. All For One put a finger to his chin, caressing it. I want you to steal quirk files, analyze all the biological information, and report it to me. Izuku releases All For One from his black whip. You're the only person who can get close to higher classified files. Izuku raised an eyebrow. This could work, he could make this work without hurting anyone. This could single-handedly put the League and All For One into checkmate. Deal, Izuku replied. Attaboy. I'll keep in touch. All For One smiled as he approached Izuku, grasping his head as he transferred Katsuki's quirk into him. Izuku yelped in pain, which was justified considering his head was already aching. All For One then ruthlessly dropped Izuku onto the ground as he used Kurogiri's portal to leave. Izuku fell under a hazy sleep once again, unable to move his body for the time being. Izuku awoke once more, distorted sounds leaking into his ears, realizing All For One had been busy setting up a small television. He sat back up slowly, a palm enveloping his forehead as he supported himself up, finally being able to maintain his gaze on the blinding television. Before he could begin to process anything, his body froze as if he was shocked into a paralysis. It was All Might, bloodied and in his skeleton form. He had his finger pointed towards the screen, all for one slaughtered on the ground not too far behind. Next, it's you. Just from the image of All Might's skeleton form, Izuku knew that at this moment, he was experiencing the end of All Might. While the symbol of his dreams, his hero, fought evil for the last time, he, Izuku Midoriya, All Might's successor, had spent the moments beforehand making a deal to cooperate with All for One, the man that ended him. He was a traitor. He was the one that single-handedly destroyed All Might by letting Katsuki and himself get kidnapped, by not being strong enough to fight back, by not living up to All Might's expectations. All for One put the television up, knowing Izuku would watch. He couldn't help but gag. Damp eyes leaked into a small trickle of tears, then flooded into an overflowing fountain of tears and ragged breaths choking him with a grip of shame. He dug his cheeks onto the flesh of his bruised forearms, unable to watch the television any longer. Eventually, Izuku's supply of tears ran dry. He took a shaky breath as he stumbled up, activating full cowling. He dashed out of the cave and headed to the horizon where he could see the nearest cityscape. They took him, Katsuki repeated, breathless. Before All Might could reply, one of Kurogiri's portals appeared before them. The villains appeared like a light turning off. They swallowed Katsuki into the magenta void faster than All Might could react. The hand that once clutched the neck of Katsuki shifted to his shoulder blades, shoving Katsuki out of the portal, tumbling him onto the concrete rubble of the destroyed home lot. As Katsuki bounced back onto his feet, he dusted off his clothes. His eyes scanned the area, his eyes landing on each skyscraper or ruin as if they were attached to a rifle scope. One conclusion he had drawn was that the League of Villains was closing in on him. What a fucking pain! Katsuki was closer than an arm's length away from escaping this humiliation ritual, but the League just had to ride his ass everywhere he went, huh? Despite his weak hearing, he had picked up on the sound of footsteps hurrying to his direction in the distance. He tapped the area around his ear, as if he was spamming a broken television remote to ensure he wasn't the one hearing things. Katsuki knew it was the pros. It seemed like Kurogiri had overused his quirk considering they didn't teleport him more than a few miles. He just needed to last a bit longer. The villains were reaching their breaking point. He was so close. Then he can go look for. Toga was the first to swing her knife at Katsuki. He swung his head back, dodging by a hair. Focus, Katsuki. Shortly after, Spinner swung his sword at the same Harmony Dabi fired his quirk. Bakugo activated his quirk and launched himself into the air with his explosions, avoiding their attacks. However, something felt off. The sparks of his quirk flowing through his veins felt like a car with no gasoline, or shaking a water bottle desperately for the last droplet. He had never experienced a sensation of dryness within his quirk before. Katsuki, not wanting to think of it, simply shook his hands, and continued to dodge the League's attacks. As Katsuki held the League off the best he could, All Might launched himself onto the battlefield, catapulting the League away with the vibration of his landing. He looked at Katsuki, implying that he was giving him a few moments to breathe, that he would take it from here. Young Bakugo, I need you to dash. Yeah, I know. I gotta leave. You can't go hard at the villains with me here. All Might nods, then the two of them go back to fighting off the League. All for One arrived soon after. Now it really began to brew into his consciousness, the fact that Katsuki needed to slip away, and fast. Bakugo! Kirishima calls out to Katsuki while dashing through midair. Supporting Kirishima, Todoroki, Ida, Yayorozu, and Azuri. Azuri had hopped into the air while Ida used his quirk to launch them forwards on Todoroki's ice platform. The key to their plan was having Kirishima call out to Katsuki. Right on time. Katsuki mumbled to himself as he suspended himself into the air with his explosions. He clasped onto Kirishima's hand, and they managed to escape successfully. They eventually land on the ground in an isolated alleyway. The first, and only, person to hug him is Kirishima. The rest of them stand around Katsuki like ghosts, unsure of what to do. Bakugo! I'm so glad you're okay. Kirishima pats Katsuki's back as his words pour out of his chest. Katsuki doesn't hug him back, but rather stands there and stiffly accepts his affection. Katsuki opens his mouth to speak, but closes it once again. But what about Deku? I'm glad you're safe, Bakugo! Yayorozu exclaims. The rest of their friends follow her cue and shuffle closer towards Bakugo, ending their paranormal, awkward activity. Ribbit, thanks for trusting us, Bakugo. I'm glad it all turned out well. Ida adds as Todoroki uses his eyes to cool off Ida's calves, nodding in agreement. Everyone fell silent once again. The reason why was obvious. The group's eyes panned to one another, then fell to the ground as if they had mutually agreed on one thing: to not ask Katsuki about it. To not ask Katsuki about where Izuku was, what had happened while he was gone, why it had been him. Without needing any reassurance from Katsuki, the fact that he'd been weirdly quiet gives them every indication they could need. Things were not the same, and they weren't sure if they ever could be again. Todoroki was the first one to snap out of their shared daze, letting out a small gasp as he caught a glimpse of the electric billboard televising the fight between All Might and All for One. The group follows Todoroki, hurrying over to the screen. As they approached closer, the angle changed to All Might pointing his finger towards the screen, bloody and a skeleton-like appearance. Next, it's you. People surrounding Katsuki were already crying and cheering him on long before this, but the sight of the symbol of peace like this, it released a collective nebula of terror. All Katsuki was able to choke out was a cheer or two before an ache, like an offbeat pulse, and his heart washed over him like a tidal wave. It was the beginning of wallowing shame that dug bone deep. It's all my fault. I ended All Might. It was like a zombie had appeared. Izuku had spent the past several hours fleeing back to Ue. Halfway there, his body and quirk gave out. Now, his feet struggled to move in coordination with one another. His ragged, torn red sneakers stumbled and crashed against each other. He could barely keep his head up. The dried-up, bloody gashes on his arms had reopened. His concussion symptoms had only become worse. He knew he was close to Ue, there was no doubt about that. He could literally see the gate just a few feet ahead of him, but to his body, it felt like he'd been in the same place for ages. He eventually reached the gate, banging on it hard enough to trigger the intruder alarm. Izuku's body gave out once he saw the figure of Mr. Aizawa sprinting his way, his body collapsing without a second thought. Izuku had woken up in Recovery Girl's room. It clicked like an instinct. Her stiff beds and the fluorescent light blinding him were far too familiar for him not to take notice. Recovery Girl always put him in the same bed too. It was the one closest to the window. He had probably slept more in this bed than his dorm room. Izuku panned to his left. Mr. Aizawa had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed. He wishes he would have woken him up more calmly, but Izuku choked up a cough, alerting Mr. Aizawa awake. Mr. Aizawa let out a sigh of relief when he realized Izuku was awake. How are you feeling, Midoriya? My head is still kinda ringing and splitting and stuff, but my arms feel fine. Izuku wiggled his newly bandaged arms. I won't ask you anything about what you went through now, don't worry. I don't want to overwhelm you while you're in this condition. Aizawa handed him a cup of water. Izuku simply nodded as he reached for the cup with shaky hands. Mr. Aizawa ended up having to hold the water cup up as he drank from it. He took a sip, and then Mr. Aizawa set it back on the nightstand beside him. Is Kaken okay? Izuku fiddled with his cast, not looking at Mr. Aizawa. Well, it's complicated, Mr. Aizawa sighed. Izuku's eyes widened as they shot over to Mr. Aizawa, knowing exactly what he was going to say. It appears that Bakugo is unable to use his quirk anymore. Everything Izuku could have said in that moment fizzled back down his throat. What was there to say when he knew everything? When he was the one responsible for Kaken losing his quirk? If there was anyone who could read Izuku's expressions from the small crinkles in his eyebrows, or the smallest scrunching in his nose, or even in the avoidant eye contact, it was Mr. Aizawa. Midoriya, nobody is going to be angry with you. Aizawa let out as he slipped a hand on Izuku's back, patting him gently. You don't understand. The glassy beads along the waterline of his eyes cracked, tears finally spilling out like a flood. Izuku began wiping his damp cheeks with the bandages on his arms, well, until Aizawa slowly reached for Izuku's arms, bringing them back down onto the blanket. You're not responsible for anything that went on during the time the League had you detained, either, is Bakugo. Aizawa nudges the tissue box towards Izuku. And don't wipe your tears and boogers with your brand new cast. Recovery Girl just finished wrapping it. Izuku took another tissue and wiped his damp eyes, a small smile forming on his lips. But it's a really, really big problem, Izuku croaked. But I have a plan. I swear I do. Izuku sat up from his bed restlessly. As he sat up, the mountain of tissues on his lap came crashing down. Calm down, Mida-dash. Aizawa raised his voice, trying to calm Izuku down, and he attempted to nudge his shoulders back down onto the pillows. I was given Kaken's quirk, and now All for One wants me to steal quirk files for him. But I swear, dash. Izuku exclaimed breathlessly, trying to brush Aizawa's hands off his shoulders. As he looked up at Aizawa, his heart skipped a beat. Not because of Mr. Aizawa, but because of the figure at the door. It took the figure a few seconds to mutter anything out. They simply stood there with their eyes widened, paralyzed at the door frame, unable to enter the room. What the fuck are you talking about? Katsuki breathed out. Izuku almost choked on his spit at the sight of Katsuki. Catch dash! Izuku wailed out before he was interrupted by a much more rough, frustrated Katsuki. Katsuki had finally left his paralytic shock, and came at Izuku with full force. Katsuki rushed over to Izuku and gripped the collar of his baggy t-shirt. His expression became much sharper than before. His eyes narrowed down at Izuku, and his brows knit themselves together. I said, what do you fucking mean you agreed to the villains? Katsuki shouted in Izuku's face as his grip tightened against his shirt, pulling Izuku closer to himself. Mr. Aizawa hopped back on his feet, and shoved Katsuki away by pulling his arms. Bakugo! Calm down! Mr. Aizawa dug his hands into the blades of Katsuki's shoulders, slightly raising his voice as he shook Katsuki. Are you a villain or hero, huh? What fucking are you, damn it? Katsuki shouted as he fought against Mr. Aizawa's hold. I'm a hero! I'm a hero, Kaken! You know what I want more than anyone! Just let me explain, dash! Izuku raised his voice as he inched closer to Katsuki and Mr. Aizawa, a trail of tears engraving into his cheeks. There's nothing to fucking X dash. It was the only way. Izuku cried out to Katsuki, his arms finally leaving the panicked air and landing on his sides, clutching the hem of his shirt. I was gonna get my quirk back all by my goddamn self. I don't need any of your useless help. Katsuki shoved his chin over Aizawa's shoulder, making eye contact with Izuku as he continued shouting. When it's you, I know there's not only one way. You think I'm stupid or something? You're always a pain in the ass, and you never stop being so damn persistent. So why'd you pick the lazy way out? Think I couldn't do it all by myself? Kaken no dash. Izuku began once again, only to be interrupted. Don't give me your shitty excuses, I don't fucking want them. Katsuki stormed out of Recovery Girl's room, slamming the sliding door with enough strength to bounce it back open. The room went radio silent the moment Katsuki stepped out, the echoes of his stomps slowly fading. It's not like there were many people anyways. It was only Izuku and Mr. Aizawa. The ruckus the three of them had made sent Recovery Girl practically flying over to Izuku's room, checking to see what the commotion was all about. As Recovery Girl entered the room, she opened her mouth, seeming as if she was wanting to say something. However, before the words could leave her mouth, they dissolved completely, leaving her mouth agape. It wasn't anything extraordinary. Izuku stood at the periphery of his bed, staring at the blank wall directly in front of him. Tears remained as flash floods on his cheeks. However, his expression didn't seem like one of sadness. It was one of apathy. Izuku's bottom lip tugged downwards, slightly opening his mouth, while his eyebrows remained neutral and his eyes kept their creaseless nature, a dissociative gaze. Mr. Aizawa was incapable of mustering out a sound to Izuku. Instead, he hesitantly placed hand on Izuku's shoulder once again, silently comforting his student. As if it was second nature, Recovery Girl softened her clutch on the sliding door handle and excused herself from the room, making sure to close the door behind her. Aizawa shuffled through his back pocket, fishing out a small pack of tissues, and slowly offered them to Izuku by tapping them on his lower back. Izuku glanced over his shoulder, noticing the tissue packet in Mr. Aizawa's hand. He pivoted his body to face Aizawa, crumpling the packet of tissues in his hands as he grabbed it. "Go talk to him when you get discharged," Aizawa began softly, patting Izuku's shoulder. "I know he didn't mean to get riled up like that, and you've still got things you want to say to him, don't you?" Aizawa bent his knees, placing the palms of his hands on his thighs to match Izuku's eye level. Izuku brushed his wet eye bags with the crumpled tissues. His gaze remained on Aizawa as he processed his words, then gave him a quick nod. Aizawa broke into a small grin as he observed Izuku's reaction. "I have to get going, but I'll be back for you tomorrow once you're discharged. If you need me for anything, don't hesitate to contact me." Aizawa reached forwards towards the door handle, until he paused in his tracks and peeked behind his shoulder. "Once again, remember, you're not responsible for anything that happened while you were under villain's surveillance. You're back safe, and that's all that matters. It's in our hands now, Midoriya. Try not to think about it too much." Izuku watched as Aizawa left the room. The next morning, Izuku wasted no time and left Recovery Girl's office. After many pleading text messages from Izuku's end, Aizawa had finally agreed to let Izuku attend classes the very same day he was discharged. Izuku explained that sitting in Recovery Girl's office would make him more restless. He would have ended up in a worryful loop as he crafted the right words to say to Katsuki. Staying there would have done him more harm than good. Well, this would have been the case if Izuku didn't stay up all night anyways, scribbling down the apology, more like explanation, draft in his notebook until the tendons in his arm ached. Izuku knew Katsuki arrived at school early, which is precisely why Izuku had decided to arrive late. He knew that Katsuki slept early and woke up early. There was a whole agenda he'd follow like the law. He also knew that Katsuki loved taking early morning walks because of how silent it was, or how much he loved his post-workout showers because the water washed away any possibility of accidentally using his quirk. Tiny habits like these, ones that Izuku watched Katsuki develop as they grew older, were really proving themselves useful now. Their classmates already knew about Izuku's return. Apparently, Aizawa had told the entire class a few days ago, ensuring his classmates of Izuku's safe return. However, despite his classmates knowing about his return, they still came crowding around him as soon as he stepped foot into the classroom. Because of the kidnapping, Yue had returned to classes, but not really. The school had gone into lockdown, so until the school board deemed it safe, they couldn't leave campus. The teachers were keeping their students busy with extra credit heroics and passion projects. Before anyone could say anything, Aizawa spat out a few words that sounded more like a scolding than a threat. "Everyone back to your seats. Do not come crowding around Midoriya, you still have an essay to write." The class exchanged a few looks, some sighing in defeat, and sat back down with their eyes glued to Izuku at the front of the classroom. "Take a seat, Midoriya. Some of your classmates lended you their notes, so I'm sure you'll catch up in no time." Aizawa spoke, now more relaxed. Izuku nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Aizawa." Izuku hurried to his seat, avoiding Katsuki's glare. The room became hushed again, only the sounds of the clock and the scratching of pencils on papers audible. Izuku couldn't concentrate. Katsuki was sitting right in front of him, still clearly angry at him, and the material Aizawa had given him to catch up on was on the history of rescue heroes, a topic he knew like the back of his hand. So instead, Izuku's eyes traced the figure of Katsuki in front of him. Katsuki knew all the material confidently. Izuku could tell because of the way Katsuki's body didn't hesitate in its movement, not even for a second. His posture remained tall and firm as his arm bounced back and forth, scribbling in the hefty stapled packet of papers. It reminded Izuku of when they were kids. Katsuki would always steal Izuku's crayons because he'd use his own too roughly, resulting in the shortening of all his brand new crayons and crafting them into an unholdable length within a few days. Katsuki never stopped this habit. Even now when he writes with his pencil, Katsuki always has a hard time erasing the lead that had been engraved into his papers. His heavy hand is actually part of the reason why Katsuki stays a studious student. It's more bothersome having to erase his own writing constantly than studying. Katsuki had finished his essay. Once again, the reason Izuku knew was because he'd always put his pencil down and fiddle with his hearing aid. The funny thing is that nobody in their class knows about Katsuki's hearing problems. Katsuki keeps his hair long enough to cover the transparent hearing aid so other people don't try to dig answers or unnecessary conversation out of him. His method of secrecy works, too. Katsuki doesn't do it often enough to spark curiosity. It looks like he's scratching his neck. Izuku only knows about Katsuki's hearing problems because Katsuki's mom had told his mom, resulting in Izuku knowing too. Izuku had never brought it up to Katsuki. There wasn't really a chance or reason to either. He never wanted to bring it up unless Katsuki brought it up first, but he was pretty sure Katsuki knew that he knew. Once everyone had their pencils down, Aizawa informed the class that their essay writing time had officially concluded, meaning they could talk to one another as they waited for the lunch bell. Aizawa proceeded to the hallway. Once the door clicked shut, the class rushed to surround Izuku at his desk. "Deku! I'm so glad you're safe," Ochako began. "Man, took you long enough." Kirishima teared up, going in for a hug. "You okay, Midoriya?" Jiraiya put a comforting hand on Izuku's shoulder from behind him. "Take it slow, Midor. You'll catch up in no time," Kaminari exclaimed optimistically. "Welcome back. I'm glad you're okay, Midoriya." Todoroki's eyes softened as he approached Izuku. "Everything's going to be okay now, Midoriya. I hope you can depend on us to help you with whatever you need." Ida followed. "Midoriya!" Mina exclaimed, teary-eyed, as she went in for a hug right on top of Kirishima. Tokoyami made eye contact with Izuku, and as they did, Dark Shadow teared up. Izuku's lips curled into a soft smile. It was touching, really, watching all his classmates worry and comfort him like he was important to them. It reminded him of how lucky he was to end up here with all of them, despite every circumstance in his life. Bittersweet thoughts like this always made his fingers tingle, or more like ache. Izuku had researched it before. Why thoughts that provoked a weird feeling of nostalgia made every nerve in his from his fingertips to his wrists ache like a heartache. There wasn't any medical background on it. However, he did find people on an online forum describing how these pains were related to the soul and heart. In simple terms, words like these summoned archived memories from the back of his mind, memories so deeply entangled with his sense of self that they manifested as physical pain to cope with the amount of suppressed emotion these memories baggaged. It was always a no-brainer when Izuku loved, but it felt like he had to become Machiavellian to make others like him. He was aware that he had been performing for an empty audience the majority of his life, but he was beginning to feel the stage fright creep up on him the moment the volume of audience members increased once he entered UA. It's hard to digest, really, that he could mean this much to his classmates. Despite the chaotic reunion behind Katsuki, he didn't spare it a single glance. He simply sat there at his desk, scribbling in his homework book as he fiddled with his hearing aid. He refused to get swallowed up into this conversation, and so he quickly slipped out of his desk and hurried out of the room before the crowd could notice anything other than Izuku. He wasn't ready to talk to Izuku yet. Not here, not with them. Izuku noticed this disappearance. He excused himself to the bathroom, and as soon as he was out of sight, he rushed over to wherever Katsuki left. While speed-walking around the school, Izuku's eyes fell upon the sight of Katsuki bent over against the wall of the dead-end hallway, his phone between his hands, his wired earphones dangling from his ears, his head tilted down towards his phone. Izuku's footsteps tapped against the ground like he was walking on clouds, making sure to not make a sound, as he snuck over to right in front of Katsuki. The moment the sight of Izuku's red sneakers crept into his field of view, his head whipped up, his expression souring at the sight of Izuku. Before Katsuki could open his mouth to curse him away, Izuku acted first. "Spar with me today, after school." Izuku's eyes narrowed in determination. Katsuki huffed, the heavy metal music leaking from his earphones as Izuku's words remained orphaned. Fine. Katsuki whipped his head back down at his phone, mumbling. You better have a damn good explanation. Izuku nodded, taking in the sight of Katsuki, who was down on the ground, staring at his phone, once more before leaving him alone. Katsuki's eyes followed Izuku's figure as he walked away. Izuku's body physically released all the nervous tension he had been building up. It was something Izuku had always done, and Katsuki couldn't help but be intrigued by it. Izuku was practically bouncing in his seat during the last few minutes of school. As the bell rang, Todoroki and Uraraka came up to him, asking if they wanted to walk back together. Izuku politely declined, mentioning that he had made plans for after school. Once the entire class had left, Katsuki stood up, walking out the door. Once he noticed that Izuku wasn't trailing behind him, but instead frantically rushing to pack up all the extra notes he had been gifted, he paused. You coming or what? Katsuki spat out, hurrying Izuku up. Coming! Izuku squeaked as he slipped on his backpack, shuffling to the spot next to Katsuki. The walk there was radio silent. There was no exchange in glances or words. Well, that's how it was until Izuku dug into the side pocket of his yellow backpack, fishing out a packet of gummy bears. Katsuki subtly glanced over at Izuku's palms, noticing the packet of gummy bears. Izuku popped the bag open, then shyly looked over at Katsuki. You want to share? Izuku nudged the bag over in Katsuki's direction. Katsuki's nape broke out into an airbrushed rosy shade, barely noticeable, startled at the sudden gesture. The fuck? Of course I don't. Katsuki shoved the bag back into Izuku's chest. But you were looking so I thought dash. I don't fucking want them! Katsuki exclaimed, his hands diving into his pockets while looking in the opposite direction, the tip of his ears heating up in embarrassment. Katsuki isn't a child anymore, so why is he being treated as one? Just because he glanced over didn't mean he wanted any. Would it kill Deku to stop overthinking every glance and movement? Izuku dug through the packet of gummy bears, resulting in Katsuki sneaking yet more glances at the source of the crinkling noises. Izuku had managed to organize a handful of all the red gummy bears in his palm, then nudged them against Katsuki's sleeve. Just take them, Izuku said more softly, deflated almost, like he was on the verge of giving up. Izuku's eyes met Katsuki's. Consider it a pre-peace offering. After a few moments, Katsuki hesitantly opened his palm and let Izuku flood it with the red gummy bears. Izuku never liked the red flavor, but it was Katsuki's favorite, or at least he hoped it still was. This was a habit the two had developed as kids, but stopped as they entered middle school. Ever since then, Izuku has had to leave all the red gummy bears at the bottom of the bag and either store them until he could offer them to his mom, or give them to the first kids he saw on the street, which usually didn't go well. Izuku's lips tugged up at the sight of the empty plastic wrapper in his hands, then peeked over to Katsuki, who dumped the entire handful into his mouth. Katsuki's cheeks became chubbier as the colony of gummy bears crowded the inside walls of his mouth. Izuku tittered quietly to himself as he reverted his gaze to the brick path in front of him once again. As soon as they entered the practice facility, the two wasted no time to change into their workout clothes and head onto the sparring mat. In the span of a few seconds, they dashed straight at each other, both attempting to be the first to land a hit. Katsuki's frustration bubbled up the more he realized how difficult it was to land a firm hit without his quirk. He began grunting after his kicks and became more reckless in his footwork, stumbling over his feet after he threw a punch. I didn't come here to play fight, so spit it out, Deku! Katsuki's voice elevated as he threw another punch at Izuku's face, only for it to be enveloped in Izuku's rough palm, countering his movement. This was it. It was time to reveal the composition of his explanation, the one he'd spent all of last night drafting out. Izuku took a deep breath, preparing to ramble out as much as he could remember from the piece of paper. I agreed to the villain so he could give me your quirk, and because he was going to hold me hostage in some sort of way anyways. I've read some stuff on quirk transferring, like it can be transferred by DNA, and you know how I got my quirk from someone. Izuku's hand tightened around Katsuki's fist, trying not to let the lies paint across his face. The only reason why he knew there was hope was because of One for All. Izuku knew that he couldn't tell Katsuki about who he received his quirk from, and he wasn't sure if he ever could, considering where their relationship stood. The line of their relationship was morally gray. The closer he inched towards the periphery of that boundary, the hazier the definition became. They were everything, yet nothing all at once. Izuku continued, and knowing how that villain has the ability to transfer quirks, I thought there would definitely be a way to get your quirk back to you. 'Cause I know that if it stayed with him, there was no way we'd get it back because only he has the volition to transfer it. Izuku panned to the ground, then back at Katsuki. I won't deny it, I am a villain for agreeing to his proposal. But if that meant we could continue being heroes together, or at least if you could continue, I'd do it again without hesitation. I'm sorry, Kaken, for stealing your quirk and agreeing to the villain's proposal. Izuku's eyes rose up from the ground, making eye contact with Katsuki, whose face was transforming from a daze into utter rage. I don't need your goddamn pity! Katsuki's arms swung up into the air, as if he was about to use his quirk, then stopped once he realized his quirk, his identity, had run dry. Izuku's eyes widened as Katsuki pushed him away at the realization of this, Izuku landing on the mat behind him. I'm sorry, Kaken. Izuku's voice cracked as he repeated his apology. He couldn't help but let droplets of his guilt fill the waterline of his eyes. Shut the fuck up! Katsuki took a step back, hiding his face in his palms as his voice began to shake, as his breath began to tremble. Kaken! Izuku shuffled towards Katsuki in concern. As he did, Katsuki didn't hesitate to pound him onto the ground, toppling himself over Izuku. Katsuki now looked down at Izuku, beads of his tears falling onto Izuku's cheeks. Katsuki's clutch on Izuku's wrist tightened as they made eye contact. I'm the reason all of this happened. That villain taking my quirk, you working with the villains, I'm the one who ended All Might. So why the hell are you sorry when you're the only one who didn't fuck things up? Why are you always the one who makes the right calls? That's probably why you look down on me, huh? What are you even talking about? I'm the one who ended All Might, none of it was your fault. And I've never, ever looked down on you. Is that really what you've thought of me this entire time? And will you stop yelling? This is why we can never have a real conversation. Izuku's voice imitated the volume of Katsuki's. The pair remained in that position, watching for each other's next movement as tears streamed down both of their faces and the sound of heavy breathing filled the empty room. I've always thought you were amazing, Kaken, even if you were mean sometimes. Izuku huffs. All Might was my hero, but you were the one in my life. Izuku's words hung in the air, leaving Katsuki breathless as he watched Izuku's face soften. Izuku always begins to spurt his words out more aggressively when he wants to win. It was the image of Katsuki that shined brightest in his idea of victory, causing him to imitate the man who always won. Izuku hesitantly released his wrists from Katsuki's loosened grip, then wrapped them over Katsuki's shoulders, pulling Katsuki into himself. Don't fucking touch me! Katsuki swung his body out of Izuku's arms, landing on his backside in front of Izuku as he stumbled away. Katsuki's heart pounded against his ribs, the vibration echoing through his body, pulsing through his veins. His breath became glued onto his throat, choking on the residue of his frustration as he smudged the palms of his hands onto his eyelids. Izuku sat on his knees as he observed Katsuki, carefully crafting his next action. His lip drooped open, but as soon as his voice croaked, he closed the trap door of his mouth shut. Izuku gazed at the ground, intaking the sound of their meshed-up cries, and then looked back up at Katsuki as his fingers came together in a tight fist on his thigh. Izuku reached out his hand, then began in a mellow voice. I've always looked up at you, Kaken. Believe it or not, I've always chased after you. Katsuki peeked through the crack of his fingers, sneaking glances at Izuku through the blur of tears. He stayed like that for a few moments, then lowered the flesh armor that protected his face, slowly taking Izuku's hand with his tear-drenched fingers. Izuku's eyes widened, unintentionally squeezing Katsuki's hand tighter, as he let out a small breath. He then took his other hand and wrapped it around their already intertwined hands, lowering his head almost enough to bump with Katsuki's shoulder. Katsuki didn't react to Izuku's gesture. He simply let Izuku pull himself closer, breathing the sweet, caramel smell of nitroglycerin that now gushed off of Izuku's sweaty hair. The aroma of nitroglycerin was something Katsuki didn't give a second thought. It was as natural as an arm, or a leg. It was something that Katsuki had been identified with, something that was his and solely his. It's like he'd been robbed of all the best parts of himself, leaving him as a bluff. The fragrance that promised him his dream left not a single doubt. No wishing on shooting stars, no wishing while blowing out birthday candles, no wishing when throwing coins into the fountain. There was no need to wish. The aroma that blossomed from the pores of his skin was proof he already had it, the future of becoming a hero. The scent of his dream filled his senses as if he was drowning. The most incredible, magical promise was a false prophecy. A supernova is a violent, stellar explosion that happens at a star's final state before complete death. During those final moments, the star radiates a light that shines brighter than an entire galaxy of ordinary stars. To juxtapose, a supernova shines the brightest at death, and Katsuki's desire to become a hero burns the most at the absence of his quirk. Despite this burning sensation galloping through his veins, there was also a tranquility deep within his heart. Izuku had been chosen to become the prophet, a title Katsuki possessed first. There was no point in denying it. Katsuki's heart pounded at the relief. It was like the stars had aligned. Katsuki slipped his free hand onto his proper thigh. His fingers climbed onto the hem of Izuku's shirt, clutching it ever so gently as their scattered cries continued. This was the first time both of them had ever said how they truly felt about each other, and to say it was relieving was an understatement. It was unveiled that they both shared guilt relating to ending All Might, and maybe, just maybe, it seemed like they were finally on the same page. After suffering through years' worth of emotional constipation, relieving it left them drained. Katsuki couldn't bring himself to nag at Izuku's soft touches, or distance himself away from Izuku's grasp. As much as he despised admitting it, and as much as he despised physical touch, the way Izuku held his hand left no room for cynical thoughts or reputations. He'd let Izuku have this one, just this once. Izuku's character was almost the inverse of Katsuki's. Katsuki knew that Izuku loved physical touch. He'd grown up with a mother whose love language also laid upon her hands. It was only natural for Izuku to comfort Katsuki this way. It was the only way he knew how, or at least that's what Izuku thought of himself. Izuku, well, Katsuki thought, had somehow always been precise in every word, every syllable, he pronounced. He inherited a velvet tongue that enchanted anyone with the soothest words they'd ever need to hear. The tragedy was that Izuku himself didn't know he possessed this gift. It was like Katsuki's scent. Izuku had fallen heir to a grand talent, and yet he never questioned it because of its naturalness. Perhaps it was time to start questioning and defining what natural is to each and every one of us. Izuku had lenses that lowered the opacity of anyone's character, allowing him to see right through them. Katsuki wasn't necessarily envious of these traits, but rather he didn't understand them. He had grown up with many more slaps on his wounds rather than kisses. Don't get it twisted, he grew up loved. His parents loved him to bits despite his bratty reputation. There weren't any other two adults who could love him as intensely and unconditionally as his parents did. There was absolutely no doubting that. The difference was that he just wasn't coddled in the way Izuku was. Physical touch at that intimacy level wasn't something in his family's culture. The sensation of another person touching his skin made the pouch in his stomach bubble up, leaving a bad taste on his tongue. It was foreign and distasteful, not to mention uncomfortable. He never felt the need to be touched like that either. Touch starvation was like an urban legend to him. He also never understood how to utilize his words. Katsuki hated sugarcoating. There was no need to say compliments if they were going to be empty words. He said what he observed, and that was that. If someone made the right call, he gave it to them straight and told them. If someone messed up, he wouldn't hesitate to say it with no filter. The problem came when these words would become too honest, so much so that it scared him. Words are the gateway to the heart, the gateway to someone's weakness. If he spoke words as delicately as Izuku, there's a possibility of someone clinging onto him like a leech, and the idea of that was a pain in the ass. Katsuki didn't like the concept of feeling in debt, or others feeling in debt to him. He doesn't like leaving the doors open from behind him. He doesn't like having a subjective weakness. The only weakness he had was himself, and it was going to stay that way unless he became stronger, strong enough to have no weaknesses. He couldn't become a liability, not to anyone, not to himself, not again. That's why he'd rather say the wrong thing, keep others at an arm's length, win by himself. Nothing good will come out of revealing your vulnerabilities. Nothing is forever. Only your persona is. Izuku's head now rested upon Katsuki's shoulder, his curls tickling Katsuki's collarbone. Katsuki, however, remained frozen. Sniffles eroded into his chest every now and then, but his body relaxed upon Izuku's touch. He gripped onto the hem of Izuku's shirt as if there was no tomorrow, and his other hand remained enveloped in Izuku's. It was untelling how much time they'd spent like that. It felt like they'd been isolated into another realm. Sharing the guilt did make the load feel a lot lighter, but was it worth the post-clarity embarrassment soon to come? A small rattle on the door handle echoed through the gym. Katsuki practically launched himself out of Izuku's grasp, Izuku imitating as he hopped back onto his feet. "Oh, hey Bakugo, Midoriya!" Kirishima announced as he closed the door behind him, his lips rendering into a gentle smile. "Hey!" Izuku and Katsuki spurred at the same time, a large gap forming in an instant between the two of them on the sparring mat, their bodies tensing up at a sudden realization. What the hell had they just been doing? And why did it feel as if they were caught in some way? Izuku and Katsuki pivoted their heads to the side, squinting their eyes at one another, peering at each other. Izuku began to feel the rush of blood pounding against his chest, the act of his palms becoming slippery against his fingertips, the elevation in his stomach that felt nauseating yet exciting. As the pair scanned like predators for Kirishima's reaction to their awkwardness. Kirishima's lips dipped open as he began to chortle. His laughter filled the air, bringing his finger up to the corner of his eye, wiping the small tears that escaped as the pair's bodies untensed. "Didn't mean to interrupt your sparring session. Wow, you guys are like the exact same. It's hilarious!" Kirishima announced as he walked towards the locker room, his duffel bag hanging from the strap wrapped around his shoulder. The door of the locker room clicked closed, and Izuku and Katsuki turned to face one another once again, avoiding the other's gaze. "I'm gonna dash." The both of them began at the same time, then quieted down again. Katsuki fiddled with the fabric of the inside of his pockets, his head turned towards the exit, then back at Izuku. "I'm gonna go." Katsuki breathed. "Ye dash, yeah, me too." Izuku scratched the back of his head, his other hand pointing towards the door. As Katsuki shuffles out the door with his bags, his hearing picks up on footsteps trailing behind him. He whips his head back. "Why are you following me? I said I was gonna head out first." Katsuki pivots his feet to face Izuku, who is now a few feet in front of him. "I also said I was going to head out. How am I following you if we're headed to the same place?" Izuku tugged on the strap of his backpack and his eyes narrowed at Katsuki, returning his attitude. "'Cause I said I was gonna go first," Katsuki countered as his voice elevated, scowling at Izuku. Nah. I said it basically at the same time." Izuku pointed his fingertips at Katsuki, flinging his hand around the air as he bickered. "You stay here. I go first. Once you see that I'm long gone, you go. I am not walking back with you." Katsuki crossed his arms as his head inched closer towards Izuku, his voice becoming more shrill as he disputed Izuku. "Wouldn't it be more fair if I went first? I gave you some of my candy earlier." Izuku's eyebrows scrunched. "You don't even like the red flavor. I was doing you a damn favor. Do you want to share? That's exactly what you said." Katsuki's eyelids toppled over his pupils, then rolled his eyes as he let out a groan while speaking. "Yeah," Izuku slurred. "But I didn't have to share, but I did anyway 'cause I felt like it." Izuku shrugged his shoulders as he raised a brow at Katsuki. Katsuki grumbled, finally surrendering against Izuku. He snapped his hands back into his pockets, stomping over to the bench at the entrance of the practice facility. Izuku cleared his throat as he followed Katsuki. Kaken, you sure you don't want to just, walk back together? It's kinda pointless to dash. Yes, nerd. I'm 100% sure. Katsuki huffed as his backside plopped onto the bench, his body slumping into it as he crossed his arms, avoiding Izuku's eye contact. All right then. Izuku breathed, his words reverting to their feigned nature. I'll see you later, Kaken. Later. Katsuki grumbled as he looked away from Izuku. As Izuku turned his back on Katsuki and began the walk to the dorms, Katsuki's eyes set onto the figure of Izuku once again, watching as Izuku faded into the distant darkness. Izuku picks at the strap of his custard backpack as his heart pulsates up to his throat. His heart had been on default like this ever since he woke up in Recovery Girl's room. Talking to Katsuki definitely helped ease it, but Katsuki was only one piece of the puzzle, a large one at that. The same night Izuku wrote his apology to Katsuki, he'd also been corrupted with other thoughts. What would his classmates think about him agreeing to the villains? What would All Might think? Would he be disappointed? Of course he'd be. But at the same time, Izuku could imagine All Might carrying the burden with him, consoling him, telling him he did what he had to. The scariest part of all, though, was that Izuku couldn't predict All Might's reaction. Going and telling All Might the entire truth, the entire story, was easier said than done. What if it caused an irreversible rift between him and All Might? Okay, a secret. Izuku had never, ever, admitted this to anyone, but he really loved being around All Might. It was probably obvious in the surface level way. Everyone knew how much he admired All Might, but this was different. It wasn't because of how he put All Might on a pedestal like the greatest fantasy there was, or how strong he was, or because he was the #1 hero. It was because All Might was the embodiment of peace. Not only while he wore his hero costume, though. Peace happened in little increments, like the time when Izuku became frustrated at the deficiency of his physical abilities on Dagoba Beach back when he was still getting ready to inherit One for All. Izuku broke down in tears when he could string up his arms to lift up ragged tires anymore. All Might kneeled next to him, rubbed his back, and suggested that instead they'd play a game of catch on the beach. Another example was earlier in the school year when All Might began packing a lunch for Izuku. They would talk about his power progression, sure. But these conversations mainly consisted of little "how are yous?" that morphed into tangents. These tangents were meaningless conversation, nothing to gain by participating in them. Even so, All Might followed his train of thoughts as if he was watching a firefly dance around in the night sky. Their topics of conversation bounced off one another, and it made Izuku ecstatic. All Might had sworn to his mom that he would be the one to watch over him, and it really does feel like All Might had sworn those words to Up and Beyond. All Might took him in as one of his own, and it sent an electric ache from the center of his heart to the tip of his fingertips. Bam! Izuku headbutts into the lamp pole as he turns onto the teacher's housing quarters. It's a narrow sidewalk, and along with it, the construction team had somehow placed the lamp right on the other side of the corner. This resulted in anyone who walked close to the wall meeting face first into the lamp pole. Izuku's hands fly up to his forehead, which now has erupted into a tiny red bump, as he squeezes his eyes shut and bends over, droplets of his tears collecting on the crease of his eyes, groaning, as he attempts to ease the pain. After rubbing the pain away, Izuku picks his head back up, collecting himself once again, and turns onto the small 2-story home with a name plate under, Aizawa. Izuku's feet hop onto the brick steps as he climbs up onto the front porch, then runs a hand through his hair and dusts himself off as his knuckles rise up to knock. Multiple muffled voices leak through the door, then the door cracks open, revealing a familiar face. Their eyelids rise, then open the door the entire way. Shinso? Oh hey! Izuku squeaks as he rubs the nape of his neck. What brings you here? Shinso tilts his head, looks over his shoulder, then back at Izuku. Well, no point in hiding it. I'm here 'cause it's dinner time. Shinso shrugs. What do? Oh! Yes, of course. I get it, don't worry, I won't tell Dash. Izuku's hands begin moving around the air like a broken carousel. It's okay, Midoriya. It's not like I was hiding that he was fostering me, anyways. You're here to see him, right? Come in. Shinso held the door open for Izuku as he stepped into Aizawa's home. He slipped his shoes off, then followed Shinso upstairs. Shinso led Izuku into the bathroom. Eri sat on the marble countertop with feet dangling off of it. Her pajama pants and shirt didn't match. They were from different sets. The socks, though, had little cartoon characters embroidered into them. Aizawa toppled over her with a hairdryer in his right hand, his left running through Eri's silver hair. His bangs were tied up and away from his forehead, a pink hair clip holding the strands of his midnight hair in place. Aizawa looked over to the doorframe where Izuku and Shinso stood, then shut the hairdryer off with a click. Midoriya? Aizawa questioned as he put the hairdryer down. Deku! Eri cheered as she extended her arm out towards him. Look what I made today! Eri wiggles her wrist. The plastic beads clank together like sand washing through the tide, and Izuku lifts it up towards his face with his palm as if he was inspecting every detail. There weren't nearly enough beads to fill up the entire translucent stretchy string, and the knot was long and messy, but the color she'd chosen made Izuku giggle. Eri had chosen the combination of green and red. This is amazing, Eri! I love the colors you chose! Izuku tilts Eri's wrists delicately, then looks up at Aizawa. I just, felt like talking. Sorry, I should have sent you some type of message or dash. Izuku's ramble was cut off by Aizawa turning the hairdryer back on, shooting a gush of heat at Izuku's face, then turning it off again. It's fine, Midoriya. That's what I told you to do. Izuku nodded. Yeah, sorry. Izuku lifted his fingertips to scratch the back of his neck once again, coiling the hair on the nape, fidgeting with whatever he could get his hands on. Aizawa looked at Midoriya, then Shinso. Shinso, finish drying off Eri's hair for me. Midoriya, come with me downstairs. Aizawa nudged the hairdryer at Shinso, then led the way to the front porch. Izuku took a seat next to Aizawa on the wooden bench. What's on your mind? Aizawa began quietly as he slumped into the bench, his eyes wandering to the flower garden in the narrow front yard. I dunno, I kinda just came here on a whim, but I talked to Kaken today, and it went good like you said, or at least I think it did, but at the same time I can't stop thinking about telling Dash. Izuku's words died on his tongue, realizing he couldn't tell Mr. Aizawa about All Might. Therefore, he had to revert to dancing around the topic. My other friends, I can't stop thinking about telling the others. What will they think, you know? Will they think differently of me? Izuku croaked as he picked at his thumbs, finally looking up at Aizawa. The wind rattled against the silver wind chimes, singing as they crashed into each other. No, they won't, Midoriya. Of course, some may have difficulty understanding the situation at first, especially because the details are under our secrecy at the moment. But if you tell them the whole story, I have no doubt that they'll understand and support you. Your friends, no, your class is a smart group of kids. They also experienced the villains firsthand, they'll know you made the right call. Aizawa paused, then panned his eyes over at Izuku's, meeting him halfway. I wouldn't sweat it too much. I've seen how you all are with one another. Have some faith in them. Aizawa hummed as he turned his gaze back to the ceramic flower pots that had Eri's crayons scribbled all over them, in the front yard. Izuku kept quiet, listening closely to every piece of advice Aizawa let out. Aizawa wasn't the type to let small compliments slip out so easily. He's become more straightforward, more emotionally open, ever since the incident. I don't see why they wouldn't empathize with you. More than anything, I'm positive that they're just grateful you made it back okay. We all are Midoriya, and that's what matters most. As your teacher, I'm here to protect and guide you. We'll take care of it, alright? Aizawa straightened his back, projecting a small smile at Izuku as he let out a small huff of air. Izuku's lip hung open, as if he's left deprived of his words. He reflected Aizawa's expression back at him, smiling at Aizawa as he nodded his head. You're right. I know they're great people, but I can't help but overthink. Izuku played with the hem of his shorts as he avoided Aizawa's gaze while speaking. My mind just gets really loud and fast sometimes. I've always been like this, so I can't really get rid of it. I end up thinking it way over, but I think it's the uncertainty I feel making me anxious. Izuku's face stayed neutral as he spoke, no creases in his brows or eyes, no biting on his lip, no dopey eyes. He simply spoke as if he was stating a fact. Aizawa tilted his head over in Izuku's direction, glancing over at him as he adjusted the pink hair clip holding his bangs with his right hand. He hummed as he began. Did it feel easier telling Bakugo? Izuku's eyelids pulsed open ever so slightly, his lower lip drooping open as his breath hitched. Yes, but no. It's because it's different with him. It always has. I don't know how to explain it. Izuku flapped his hands around as he spoke mechanically, as if he was a broken record. Izuku took a small breath, collecting himself. I've known Kaken since I was little, so I was expecting some sort of reaction. It was more predictable, but at the same time, it was also scary. I didn't want him to misunderstand like at Recovery Girls. Izuku balled up his fist, his fingertips crumbled into his palm. Does it feel better now that you've told him? Aizawa's gaze stayed on Izuku. Izuku nodded. A lot better. Aizawa's lips tugged up. Keep it a secret until you're ready. I'm telling you, Midoriya, they'll understand, and wait. Izuku attempted to silence the crowd of thoughts in his mind by starting his heroic passion project. The talk with Aizawa earlier definitely helped him calm down, but the loud, racing chatter in his mind was so natural to the point where he couldn't notice when it began. Of course, he chose to write about All Might for his heroics project. How All Might, the symbol of peace, has affected the structure of our societal standards. Izuku finished his assignment at the same tempo his mind maneuvered at. It was relatively easy considering how little research he had to do. Even though it was an extra credit, optional, assignment, there was definitely pressure to partake in it. Everyone from the class was doing it. Who'd waste an opportunity to get ahead? However, he now sat unoccupied at his desk, bathing in the dim rays of light coming from his lamp, aiming at the essay papers on his desk. His mind went blank, probably because of the sleep debt catching up to him, and slumped further into his stiff wheelie chair. But Kaken! A snarky yelp bled into Izuku's dorm room. Izuku jumps at the sudden volume in the hallway, then tiptoes his way over to the front door. He can't help but drop his nosy tendency. It was engraved into his introverted self at this point. Izuku peeks out his door just enough to get a glimpse at the action in the hallway. Kaminari and Kirishima were practically melting themselves into Katsuki's door, trying to prevent Katsuki from slamming it shut. Don't call me that, asshat! Katsuki countered, doubling the volume of Kaminari's voice. Come on, Kaken! Just come on! Hear me out, I need help, man! And no offense, Kiri, you're no help! Kaminari huffed as he thrusted himself onto the door. Dude? I'm much help! That's so mean! I bet I know more than Bakugo. Kirishima furrowed his brow at Kaminari as he copied Kaminari's movement. The two were in a 2-versus-1 against Bakugo, yet they still struggled to force the door to Bakugo's dorm room open. Izuku couldn't help but cringe at Kaminari calling Katsuki Kaken. There wasn't any reason why it would bother him, it just did. You've never dated a girl in your life. Kaminari nudges Kirishima as he pushes against Katsuki's force on the door. PFT, and Bakugo has? I doubt he's even had a crush. Kirishima asks sarcastically as he pans his eyes to Kaminari. Kirishima's eyes widened, then put a hand over his mouth, causing him to trip on his feet and lose his balance. His palm slips away from the door, as his legs tumble into Kaminari's ankle. The two crash onto the door, then slide down onto the ground as they groan, rubbing their foreheads. No offense, dude! Kirishima continues. Katsuki finally reveals himself, and stomps menacingly towards the pair. They shuffle away from Katsuki, waving their hands at him in forgiveness. Katsuki's smile twitched against the corner of his mouth, his eyes imitating. Do you really think I have time to waste dating an extra? Nope. We're just curious. The pair tenses up as they speak in unity. Kaminari turns his stare away from Katsuki, then exhales. His posture slumps over, and his facial expressions droop. I just wanted help, 'cause I thought you'd be popular with the girls. Kaminari exhales. Stop beating around the bush. What is this about? Katsuki rolls his eyes and clicks his tongue, but Izuku knows Katsuki is concerned. He always clicks his tongue when he's concerned. Well, not that he's ever done it to Izuku, anyways. As Kaminari was about to speak, a higher-pitched voice interrupted the flow of Kaminari's words. What are you guys doing exactly? Jairu raised an eyebrow as her pointer finger rotated, in a circle, through each and every one of them. Kaminari jumped onto his feet as if there was a spring attached to him. His fingers begin to fidget with the hair on the nape of his neck as he glances up at Jairu, then back on the ground, then back up at Jairu. Jairu! Oh, hey! What a coincidence, isn't it? Kaminari fabricated a laugh as his cheeks glistened maroon. Deku? You damn stalker! Katsuki stomped over to Izuku, Kirishima yanking Katsuki's arm back as he did. Izuku yelped as he raised his hands defensively to his face as Katsuki grasped the collar of his baggy shirt, pulling their faces closer. Izuku refused to meet Katsuki's eyes, and instead titled his gaze away from Katsuki as he stared at the wall. I'm not a stalker if I just wanted to see if everyone was okay outside. You guys were screaming. Izuku countered as his fingers trailed from his face to Katsuki's wrist. Stop acting like a smartass. How long were you stalking me for, HM? I already told you, I wasn't stalking you. Izuku slurred the last few syllables of his plea of innocence as he rolled his eyes. Oh, so you were just listening in like a creep? That's stalking, genius! Katsuki shook the collar of Izuku's shirt as he played into the banter. Nah. Izuku spat. Uh-huh. Katsuki trailed. Nah. Uh-huh. Katsuki proclaimed even louder as he pulled Izuku closer. Close enough to pick up the sweet fragrance of nitroglycerin escaping from Izuku's sweat glands. Close enough to intertwine their furrowed brows and have it become one. Close enough to feel the pressure of the other's words catapult onto their face. Close enough to start a war with each other's bodies. Whoa guys, chill out. Violence is never the answer. Kaminari nudged himself between the two of them, tightening his head as he flashed a grin, nonchalantly eyeing the two of them. Rich coming from you. Jairu spat from behind Kaminari as she crossed her arms. Kaminari, will ya? We gotta work on this. Kirishima muttered under his breath. He raised his palm up to his forehead, face planting into it as he observed Kaminari from Bakugo's side. Izuku and Katsuki's glare remained frozen on each other, until Jairu broke the news to the group. Anyways, Mississippi Midnight just came to the common area and told everyone to get to their dorms, so you guys better get there fast before you get a penalty for it. The chatter stopped the moment the elevator began ticking. Someone was coming up. In an instant, the crowd that once took up the halls escaped away as fast as their legs could allow them. As Katsuki rushed to close the entrance to his room, he called out to Izuku once more. Don't think I'm letting you off the hook, stalker. Katsuki pointed his finger at Izuku through the cracked open door. Whatever you say, Kaken. Izuku rolled his eyes, then watched as Katsuki slammed his door shut. Shortly after, Izuku clicked his door shut and let out a chuckle. Today was the day. Their heroics passion projects were due, and it was time to read their essay to the class. Mr. Aizawa explained to the class that they would be presenting in seating order, so Izuku would present near the end of the block, right after Katsuki. Obviously, everyone chose their favorite heroes. Kirishima wrote about how Crimson Riot tore through the stereotypes of the necessity of talent in the hero world. Uraraka wrote about 13 during her mission with the United States government. Tokoyami wrote about Hawks and his past with the Heroes Commission. The list goes on and on. Izuku couldn't help but jot down notes during each and every one. He was itching to write every detail on his classmates' essays down onto his analysis notebook. Aizawa called Katsuki up to the podium at the front of the classroom. Katsuki hurried up, and clinked the thin pile of paper on the periphery of the podium. Then, he lifted his narrow, glared, stare out towards the class. How All Might skyrocketed the standards of our hero society by me! Katsuki gruffed, his eyes tapping from the class back onto his paper as he began to read. Izuku's eyes shot open as he parachuted deeper into his chair. He glanced at the title of his essay, then back up at Katsuki, then back down at his essay. Izuku raised his thumb up to his lip as he began to nibble on his fingernail. Somehow, he and Katsuki had managed to write about the same topic. Not even managed, it was practically identical. The cherry on top, though, was that Izuku would have to walk up right after Katsuki, and talk about whatever Katsuki was talking about now for the second time. Izuku let out a huff as he adjusted himself on his seat, wiggling himself forwards, then flipped to another section in his hero analysis notebook. He decided it'd be most fitting to write about Katsuki's presentation in Katsuki's section of his notebook. This essay was about All Might, yes. However, the details Katsuki pointed out about All Might were also coming from an opinionated stance. This was Katsuki's writing, Katsuki's standpoint. It'd be logical to use this time to write about Katsuki instead of All Might, especially because Izuku had the exact same facts ready. It was alluring to listen to the same facts with a bias or different perspective on it, another interpretation of the same ideology Izuku possessed. It kind of felt like Izuku was getting to know him like this, like a one-sided conversation. Katsuki never really talked passionately about anything other than himself, but when he did, Izuku always took note of it. Katsuki's essay had a more centric focus on how All Might's strength created a new standard in the hero's society, rather than his rescue. Not only his physical strength, but his emotional strength. He took note of how no matter what the situation was, All Might always had the emotional strength to believe in his physical strength. This idea manifested absolute victory. The new standpoint in society was that if someone lacked the emotional strength, they would never be able to achieve perfect victory. Once Katsuki finished, he wasted no time to slash the packet of papers onto Aizawa's hands and stomp back to his seat. Great job, Bakugo. Well said. Aizawa praised as he shuffled through the packet of papers, the class clapping filling the room. Izuku poked his finger at Katsuki's shoulder, nudging the shoulder pads embedded into their uniform jackets. Katsuki swung his head back at Izuku, his brows knit together so tightly they could be tied into a knot. What? Katsuki miffed. I liked your essay. Izuku exclaimed under his breath as he gave Katsuki a thumbs up. Of course you did, 'cause you're a nerd. Katsuki lifted a brow as he raised his fingers up to flick Izuku's thumbs up, shooting them down. Hypocrite! Izuku huffed as he rested his chin into his palm, his eyes narrowing as Katsuki turned back around. Moments later, Izuku's name was called by Aizawa. Izuku scrambled to collect his essay. His hand grazed the table, then sliced his water bottle off its stand. The metal water bottle clanked as it hit the ground, causing Izuku to duck onto his knees and pick it back up. As Izuku rose back up onto his feet, his head collided with the corner of his desk. He hissed at the sharp pain. Then, his fingers through his hair as he tumbled back onto the balls on his feet, rubbing the sore spot on his head. As Izuku collected himself again, dusting off his uniform, putting his water bottle back onto his desk, collecting his essay properly, he began to walk towards the podium. His vision narrowed onto one person in the audience. Their back hunched over their desk, their body twitched in an up and downwards motion as they hid their face into the palms of their hands. Little, quiet, sharp snorts of air escaped occasionally. Katsuki was practically dying of laughter over Izuku's clumsiness. Bakugo! Aizawa scolded, then looked over at Izuku as he put a hand up beside his mouth, hiding his lips, and began whispering. Do you need to go see Recovery Girl? Izuku shook his head. No, I'm all right. Izuku waved his hands. Aizawa was the only person, besides Katsuki, who knew about the severity of Izuku's head injuries, and refused to overlook a singular head bump. They couldn't afford to neglect the state of Izuku's health, no matter how subtle it was. Izuku couldn't help but suppress a smile. He couldn't call Katsuki entirely wrong for laughing at his fall. It was kinda funny, as much as he hates to prove Katsuki's ridicule right. Izuku cleared his throat, then looked straight ahead. His eyes locked onto the back wall of the classroom. A teacher back in middle school had taught him this strategy for presentation work. Despite the fact that presentation work doesn't make him anxious anymore, the eyes of his peers made him lose concentration. Thus, his gaze remains on the most simplistic, inanimate object in the room. He took a breath. How all dash! Izuku's voice cracked, and Katsuki's snort echoed through the room. He dug his face deeper into the sleeves of his uniform jacket, trying to mediate the gush of laughter within him. Izuku's face began to burn, then cleared his throat once more. How All Might, the symbol of peace, has affected the structure of our societal standards, by Izuku Midoriya. Izuku went autopilot for the entire presentation. There was no hesitation in his words, every word as smooth as butter. He even answered questions to clarify afterwards. Everything went great. Well, that was until his eyes finally unlocked from the wall, and glanced over at Katsuki. Katsuki slammed one of his palms onto the surface of his desk, launching himself onto his feet as he raised his other hand into the air. Aizawa exhaled, expecting the tantrum soon to come. Bakugo. Deku, you plagiarized my work. You damn copycat! Katsuki screeched as his finger landed in the direction of Izuku. Plagiarized? What? Kaken! I didn't even know you were doing All Might! Izuku exclaimed from the other side of the classroom. You practically wrote the same thing as me. When did you steal my essay? Kaken, I didn't dash. Izuku leaned forwards onto the podium as he countered Katsuki as Katsuki leaned his body weight over his desk. Alright, let's stop here. This is a perfect time to introduce your next project, and I'm making you and Bakugo partners since the two of you think so alike. Aizawa interrupted as he walked up to the podium. Izuku handed his essay to Aizawa silently, then snuck a glance at Katsuki, who now slumped back onto his seat, glaring at Izuku, crossing his arms as closely as he could. He shuffled back to his seat, plopping down behind Katsuki. Now that you've all done some background on a hero of your choosing, we're shifting to a more hands-on activity. For the next 2 weeks, you're going to create a hero from scratch. From their quirks, to their mindset, to their costumes, to their weaknesses and intentions. And no, this cannot be like any hero you've heard of. You will be docked points if it isn't niche enough. On the day of the deadline, your heroes are going to fight against each other, as well as team up with other heroes to defeat a villain us faculty create. Ochako raises her hand. How are our heroes going to be tested if they're not real? We have a simulation for it. You'll be able to go in and customize them if needed. How exactly are we graded? Is there a rubric? Ida adds. This is a partner project, so you're graded on multiple things. 1. If you're able to work successfully with your partner. Teamwork is what'll end up creating the best hero. 2. If your hero is well balanced. You're more likely to withstand all conditions in the simulation. You don't know what you're going up against, so you have to think about a well-rounded character. 3. Uniqueness. Don't think you can pass with something I've seen many times before. And 4. Your hero's morals. What makes them special? The class begins scanning the room, silently making partner pairs. Well, that's all I have for today. Great job today, everyone. Aizawa zips up his sleeping bag, then disappears into the hallway. Chatter in the classroom begins. Izuku, however, plays with the All Might pin on his pencil pouch, waiting for Katsuki to turn around. A few minutes go by. Katsuki refuses to surrender so easily, so instead he gives Izuku the cold shoulder. Once the majority of the class rushes out, Katsuki groans, then pivots his chair so it's on the opposite side of Izuku's desk. Thanks so much, copycat. Now I have to work with you. Katsuki snarks as he slumps further into his chair, tapping his index finger against his forearm impatiently. I mean, you usually work with whoever comes up to you first anyway, so dash. Izuku mumbles as his eyes flick up towards Katsuki, who sat in front of him. Shut up! Katsuki barks, then slams his notebook onto Izuku's desk, his fingers spread out onto the sheets as he holds it open. Izuku raises a brow at Katsuki, then looks further into Katsuki's notebook. I already have a hero planned out, so don't fuck this up. Katsuki relaxes back into his chair as he lets Izuku flip through the pages. Katsuki's notebook is filled with hero ideas, almost like Izuku's analysis. His eyes softened at the rough sketches and messy handwriting, like Katsuki was getting excited over the ideas brimming his mind as he wrote them. Kaken, you do hero analysis too? Izuku lowered the notebook so they could meet eye to eye. This is not analysis. I don't do that nerdy shit. Katsuki's voice elevated defensively. This is so cool. I really like the detailed drawings, you're a lot better than me at it. I also like the way you organize the information in sections. Whenever I do that, I always end up running out of room, so I don't do that anymore. And the dash. Shut up! Katsuki rammed the notebook into Izuku's face. Izuku giggled into the line paper as he grabbed onto Katsuki's wrists. Katsuki retracted his hands at the sudden contact. Then Izuku lowered the notebook back onto his desk as he continued to flip through the pages. Katsuki mumbled curses out into the atmosphere as he looked anywhere but in the direction of Izuku. The blood in Katsuki's body rushed to his head in response to the sudden embarrassment. The gush heated up against the apples of Katsuki's cheeks and erupted a rosy color. But Izuku preferred to ignore that if he wanted to make peace with Katsuki. I'd be okay with taking one of your hero designs and modifying them, if that's what you want, but I also think coming up with a new one would be pretty fun. Izuku pointed the tip of his pencil at Katsuki. "See mine?" Katsuki mumbled. Sorry, what? Izuku leaned farther into the desk, trying to pick up on Katsuki's muted dialogue. I said we should use mine. Katsuki spat as he sat up in his seat. Izuku's voice became monotonous compared to how he usually spoke, yet he tried to remain optimistic. Oh yeah? Sounds good. Katsuki looked at Izuku, unamused, then snatched his notebook back and began cradling it in his arms. The nerve you have lying to my damn face. I can do it all by myself anyways. It was almost like Katsuki was pouting. That was definitely a first for Izuku. Normally, Katsuki would just scream at Izuku until he got his way. Katsuki sprang onto his feet as he prepared to leave Izuku stranded at his desk. However, Izuku followed. Kaken! I never said I didn't like your designs. Well... Izuku clutched onto the strap of the navy school bag around Katsuki's shoulder. His expression was heavy with opposition, but had a plaster of wanting to please Katsuki. Get to the point. Katsuki shook off Izuku's grab. I was looking forward to making a new hero together. You know. Izuku croaked as his gaze lingered on Katsuki's cuffed sleeve. You think my designs aren't good enough or something? Katsuki's face soured. Izuku huffed. You always jump to that. I already told you, Kaken, it's not. His fingers flew up to the ridge of his nose. Progress with Katsuki was never linear, it always relapsed like a circle. It was frustrating, yet he didn't want to give up. I was looking forward to this assignment. Yes, I'm a nerd for this stuff, I won't deny that. So let me build a hero with you. I don't just want to watch. Izuku shook his head as his eyes met Katsuki's. Let's make the best hero ever, and win this class competition. Izuku lifted a fist, inviting Katsuki to bump his own against it. Katsuki rolled his eyes, the corner of his lips tugging up. Yeah? Whatever. Let's do this, but I'm leading. Katsuki left Izuku's fist dangling in the air as he walked away. Izuku bumped his own fist after a few seconds of bathing in his own embarrassment, then chased after Katsuki. Kaken, wait up! Let's start today! Katsuki scratched his head as he scribbled in his notebook. Earlier that day, Izuku had expressed that he wanted to make a new hero from scratch instead of using Katsuki's dozens of thought-out designs. The hell was his deal? Katsuki mumbled as he pouted his lip. He thought Izuku would agree on the spot, not have to fake it. That's how Izuku always was, But ever since he got that damn quirk, he's been speaking his mind more often. More than anything, and as much as Katsuki hated to admit it, it was embarrassing. He'd shown Izuku his nerdy collection of drawings like it was nothing, yet only now he was getting worked up about it. So now, mainly to redeem himself, he and Izuku had agreed upon brainstorming by themselves first. This way, when they worked on it together during class, they'd be able to get to a point faster. Katsuki decided that no matter how long he'd have to stay up past the usual time he goes to sleep, which was 8:30 sharp, he would create the perfect hero. One that even Izuku couldn't deny as their ace. Katsuki tapped his pencil onto his chin, blankly looking at his paper. The perfect hero? Wasn't that obvious from his presentation? It was All Might. Katsuki then glanced up towards the shelf hovering above his desk. There on the shelf stood several All Might figurines, pins, and special magazine editions with All Might plastered all over them. He then slid his hands into the pocket of his sweatpants, grazing the holographic All Might card he'd gotten over a decade ago. Nothing could compare. It was practically glued onto him. Katsuki's deepest, darkest secret? He wanted it signed. It was just too embarrassing to ask. He flipped his pencil back over, then began scribbling. The perfect hero. Quirk. Shapeshift. Mass control? Atom configuration? Maybe? Katsuki groaned as he slammed his notebook shut. He'd already spent the past 3 hours alone brainstorming, and this is all he's got? An ache pulsed from the center of his heart down to his gut as the crisp, burn marks on his notebook caught his attention. In the past, whenever he'd get frustrated with his hero analysis, he'd accidentally release sparks of his quirk as his hand rammed into the back cover of his notebook. Katsuki sprang off his chair as he snatched the notebook from his desk, gripping it so tightly the papers folded against his fingers, and shot it at the wall near his bed. His grunt rippled into an itch in his throat, as if the ache manifested into sour droplets of melancholy trickling up against the back of his throat. As he continued his tantrum, his toe rammed into the plastic wheel of his chair as he gutted it towards the window. He recoiled his knee up to his chest as he held his foot, hissing at the sudden wound as tears coiled up in his tear glands, making his vision blurry. Cracks of his frustration began leaking out orally as he choked on his groans, stomping his feet onto the ground as he launched his hands up to his head, slapping them against his skull repetitively as he yanked on sections of his hair. Katsuki then fell to his bed as he frantically rubbed his eyes, the trail of tears smearing all across his cheeks. Then, suddenly, a ringing sound sliced through his head, causing him to yank his hearing aids. The sound of the air conditioner went silent, the small tapping against the hallway floor disappeared, the muddled laughter dissolved. The entire world was drowned out, and he was left at the seafloor of isolation he'd encapsulated himself in. He assumed he'd been holding it together frankly well, considering how detached he felt to the entire situation. The scent of his nitroglycerin radiating off of Izuku was off-putting, sure, but not enough to drive him this crazy. The only times he acted out like this were either with Izuku, or no one at all. It was like every feeling he'd bottled up had exploded all at once. Now, he didn't feel like doing anything, he wasn't even sure if he was capable of it anymore. It was a matter of time before he got kicked to the curb, kicked off the hero course. The sole thought of it made his lungs paper thin, his limbs sleepy, and his body heavy with shame. His sense of self was crashing down like a house of cards, and all he could do was watch it unfold. He always knew that to be a star, he had to burn. But what happens when there isn't any fuel to begin the fire to begin with? Katsuki remained on his bed until he felt numb. Sniffles escaped every now and then, but he eventually calmed down. With lazy fingers he grazed over the nightstand where the cure to his blurry vision resided. Then, he slipped on his cocoa-framed glasses as he looked for the tossed hearing aids that lingered on the wooden flooring of his dorm. Katsuki's vision wasn't all that bad, at least compared to other people that wore glasses. It was uncomfortable to wear when he didn't need to, and he could still make sense of objects if he squinted hard enough. During class and everyday life, he wore his contacts. When he began middle school, he'd spend more time squinting at the chalkboard than he did writing down his notes, resulting in his lowered grades. Because of this, he got contacts with absolutely no objection. Katsuki slouched as he sat up against his navy comforter, sighing in relief, not that he could hear the tremble in his breath, once he spotted where he'd thrown his hearing aids. He rubbed them against his cotton shirt, and plugged them back into the canals of his ears. His gaze shifted back at the warm light radiating from his desk lamp, and made his way back to his desk, notebook in hand. Katsuki flopped back into his chair, but Izuku's face suddenly popped into his mind, intruding on it. "And I've never, ever looked down on you. Is that really what you've thought of me this entire time? You always jump to that." "I already told you, Kaken, it's not." Deku was so weird. But maybe he was. Katsuki shook his head, deflating any further thinking as he dove back into his notebook. "Did you guys hear that last night?" Mineta sneered as he put a hand up against his lip, tapping Izuku's back as his gaze circled around his classmates. Izuku peeks over his shoulder as he listens in. "Hear what?" Kaminari flicks his hand at Mineta curiously. Mineta slides his gaze across the classroom, then peers back at the group huddling up against his desk. "Bakugo was banging up the dorms last night. He went cray-cray." Mineta swirls his index finger up near the top of his head. Izuku raises a brow. "What do ya mean? Doesn't he always do that?" Mina glances at the door, then back at Mineta as she whispers. No. This time, he was going crazy. I swear on ITH." Mineta stumbles over his lisp. "Like how?" Kaminari leans closer. "First, I heard a loud bang against my wall. You know how paper-thin the walls are. Then I heard another bang, but it wasn't on FA wall. Then I heard him cussin' and stuff." Mineta bobbed his head as he patrolled the classroom with his eyes once again, making sure Katsuki was nowhere to be seen. "He has been acting kinda weird since the incident. Kaminari rubbed his chin as he ruffled his brows. As Katsuki stormed into the classroom, the group sprang back into their own space. Izuku reached towards Katsuki, attempting to get his attention, but just as he was about to place the buds of his fingers into Katsuki's uniform jacket, Aizawa slid open the door. "Good morning, everyone." Aizawa set his elbows onto the podium, relaxing his body weight into it. "We'll be starting the final project of the Summer Heroics Unit today. Please write you and your partner's name on a slip of paper and drop it into here." Aizawa jingled a small metallic bucket against his fingers. The chatter in the classroom began as everyone began making their partners, but Katsuki and Izuku sat frozen. Aizawa had already assigned them partners. Therefore, there was no reason to mingle until it was absolutely necessary. That was until Katsuki wiggled his chair to face Izuku. "Katsuki wore glasses today?" It was hard to notice if you didn't spend most of your lifetime with Katsuki, but his eye bags were a little puffier than usual. "What?" Katsuki growls, but this time his voice lacked the usual coarseness. It was quieter, as if it had wilted overnight. Izuku snaps out of his haze. The change in Katsuki caught him off guard. He'd ended up studying the change long enough for Katsuki to make note of it. "Nothing." Izuku squeaked as his eyelids yanked open, like reality was shot at them. Katsuki's glare poked Izuku for a few more seconds, then reverted down to his lap. "I brainstormed." Katsuki muttered under his breath as he avoided Izuku's stare. "Oh, that's great. I also did a lot of brainstorming last night. It was a lot harder than I thought once I sat down and wanted to actually do it. The task becomes a lot harder when you gotta consider I'm rambling again." Izuku's voice hollowed out as he scratched his head, embarrassed. Katsuki stayed silent, signaling Izuku to continue. "Can I see?" Izuku croaked as he lowered his hands to grip his pencil pouch. Katsuki flipped through his bent notebook softly, as if it was a historic scripture. "It's not much, but I still have my whole notebook of ideas, so..." Katsuki dug his chin into the palm of his hand as he observed Izuku from his high ground. The light in Izuku's eyes danced around like shooting stars in the sky. "Kaken, I have the same one written down. We should do this one." Izuku pointed at 3. Atom configuration. You know what, maybe we should change it. Katsuki hovered his pen over his notebook. Kaken, come on. Izuku covers the lined paper with his hands, the pen's ink embedding into the skin of his knuckles. Izuku pulls the notebook towards his torso, and Katsuki follows. He leans over Izuku's desk, trying to grasp at the notebook cradled in Izuku's arms as he leans further back into his chair. Give it! Katsuki spits as he dips further into Izuku's desk, one of his knees resting upon Izuku's desk as he balances his topple. Don't tell me you just want to change it cause I also chose it, Kaken! Izuku grunts as he leans further back, the front legs of the chair now suspended off the ground as the back of his chair slams into Mineta's desk. The chair tips over like a seesaw, and Izuku's body curls as it hits the legs of Mineta's desk. Katsuki's knee slips at the sudden movement, and he lunges forward, ramming into Izuku's body soon after. Katsuki's torso crashes into Izuku's. They groan as their ribs clash against each other. His glasses catapulted onto Izuku's forehead during their fall, and now rest of the floor next to Izuku's ear. Katsuki's nose tousles through Izuku's hair as he lifts his head, which bangs into the wood hovering above them. He hisses at the sudden pain, then retracts his head back into the crook of Izuku's shoulder, as he eases the pain with his hand. Midoriya Bakugo. Outside now? Aizawa exhales. Izuku and Katsuki are seated on the opposite ends of the same couch, avoiding Aizawa's glare. Honestly, I'm not too surprised about what happened in the classroom. That's not why you're here. The pair's glance pokes their interest back up towards Aizawa. You're here to be interviewed on what happened. Aizawa shifts his gaze towards Izuku. Bakugo sinks deeper into the cushions of the couch. His nostrils begin flaring up, the crease in his eyebrows deepening. You'll be excused from class, this is most likely going to take up the time from now until dismissal. Izuku and Katsuki remained silent. Aizawa sludges up from the plastic stool as he paces past where the troublemakers sat, softly sliding the door shut. Izuku shifted his gaze towards Katsuki, attempting to sneak a glance at him. Oh. Katsuki's eyes were already tilted in his favor, right at him. As they met eyes, Katsuki's shoulders jumped up as he retreated from their shared glimpse. Katsuki turned away from Izuku, which left the image of the nape of his neck projecting towards Izuku. Izuku's hands sunk into the cushion as his weight shifted upon it. They almost rendered into gloves as they molded around his fingers whilst leaning towards Katsuki. Izuku's breath hitched. I'm surprised we aren't getting in trouble for earlier. Katsuki's ears perked up at the sound of Izuku's gentle voice. No crap. He's probably looking at it like everything's going back to normal. Katsuki grumbled, still refusing to create a middle ground. Izuku tugged the skin of the couch with his fingers. Yeah, that would make sense. Before Izuku could open his mouth again to attempt yet another conversation, a few members of the police force make their way through the door alongside Aizawa. I would assume the two of you know Tsukachi? Aizawa began sternly. Tsukachi gives a small nod as he raises his palm up in a subtle greeting. The rest of the small police crew lingers behind him, notepads and expensive pens in hand. Izuku sits up in his seat, causing the leather coverings to crinkle up against his body. He then nods enthusiastically as he tenses up, his shoulders heightening up while gripping the fabric of his pants. Katsuki remains slouched in his seat, refusing to even distribute a single glance out at the police force. He instead furrows his brows deeper, and buries his cheek harder into his palm. Aizawa turns to Tsukachi once again. I already explained to them what you'd be here for today. Go ahead and begin whenever you're ready. Tsukachi tugs at the tight collar of his buttoned shirt, then lets out a loaded sigh as he inches closer to the duo. He sits down on the stool and plants his elbows onto his thighs, slouching as he begins. Which one of you is Bakugo Katsuki? Izuku's eyes hover towards Katsuki's direction. Katsuki, still refusing to cooperate, stays nonverbal. Tsukachi catches on by the look in Izuku's eyes. All right then. Midoriya, you'll be with Tamakawa this afternoon. Tamakawa waves his notepad with a dim smile on his face. The bell around his neck jingles subtly as he walks in front of his comrades. Got it. Izuku says quietly as he shuffles up from his spot on the couch, and leaves with the cat-eared police officer. The room simmers in the silence of rejection. Katsuki refuses to acknowledge the presence of Tsukachi sitting in front of him. With a pen click, Tsukachi begins. How are you, Bakugo? Katsuki refuses to respond. Another pen click. The faster you choose to cooperate, the faster you'll be done and outta here. Katsuki slowly brings his attention towards Tsukachi. Get lost. Katsuki sharpens his tongue under his mumble. We're gonna keep coming until you choose to talk to me, so how about getting this done today? You'll never have to see me again, for this case at least. After a brief pause, Katsuki shifts to his spot on the couch and finally removes the armor of flesh from his face. This was embarrassing. I got taken by some C-listers. Deku decided to be a stubborn bastard and follow me. Some emo boss guy barged into their lame-ass hideout and stole my quirk, and the idiots made an escape route. Katsuki crossed his arms as his glare sharpened. There, so let me leave. Tsukachi stares blankly, letting his eyelids droop like a half-moon over his eyes as he attempts to make sense of whatever gibberish Katsuki spoke of. Kid, I need you to speak normally, and more in depth. Whenever you're ready, you can start recounting everything you remember from that night. Tamakawa purrs as he sits up in his seat, clicking his pen as he brings his notepad closer to his face. Izuku breathes out, his heart galloping at an uncontrollable pace for no known reason. It really began for us once we made real contact with the villains. My classmates and I figured out the villain's motive. It was to capture Kaken. So, we made a plan to protect him by circling him as we walked. Tokoyami stood behind Kaken, by the way. Izuku's leg began bouncing up and down. As he continued, Aizawa lurked at the doorway with a steamy mug of coffee in his hand. Tokoyami and Kaken were taken by Mr. Compress. I assume they also took Tokoyami to do it more discreetly. Izuku threw his thumb up to his chin as his gaze remained on his thighs. We only noticed it once Uraraka pointed it out after a while of walking. After that, we kinda panicked and started chasing after the villain. Izuku picked at the skin on his thumb. Then, when we were fighting, Kaken was released from the marble. I ran after him, and I ended up getting taken by the villains. I remember waking up inside this bar, but the rest of it is kinda blurry. I remember waking up with Kaken, fighting the villains, and then their boss coming in to take Kaken's quirk. After that, I passed out and I was taken to another place. Izuku paused as his throat became dry. The shame of turning to extreme measures, such as negotiating with the man who ended all, might eat him alive. Tamakawa flaps his notebook as he tilts his head, looking closer at Izuku, who now sat amidst his memories. And at... The words cremated in his throat, making his breath twitch. Izuku's chest trembled at the drum of his heart, goosebumps ran down his spine, the nerves in his knuckles ached. He was paralyzed within the nebula of self-frustration. Aizawa and Tamakawa stood put, letting Izuku regain his composure. We can take a break, Tamakawa began momentarily. It's okay, I'm fine. My throat felt kinda itchy, that's all. Izuku chuckled as his eyes fluttered closed, a hand tossed into his hair with ease. Izuku reverted his gaze back to his lap as he continued recounting the course of that night. Then, all for one, the boss from earlier saw potential in my power. He said something about not having enough quirk memory to take mine, that Kaken's quirk took up a lot of it. Back up, quirk memory? As in, from the quirk infinitude theory? Tamakawa shook his head as he wavered a pause. The quirk infinitude theory began with the cult of filthy rich scientists. They possessed the desire to attain a variety of different quirks, drifting to extreme measures as the results of their inhumane experiments faltered. The collective of scientists began to test on other human beings, stealing and mixing and mashing different quirks together, almost like gnomes. As time went on, the sources of these stories became blurrier, and thus, becoming more of a creepypasta. Yeah. I was also pretty taken aback. I didn't even think it was physically possible to have an inventory of quirks, let alone steal them. Doomsday seems to get nearer and nearer, eh? Tamakawa chuckled in an attempt to lighten the mood, only to be shut down by Aizawa's piercing glare. Anyways, I heard from Mr. Aizawa here that you made some type of deal with him, is that correct? Izuku nodded. Yeah, I did. The air that surrounded the atmosphere of the conversation became dense. Would ya mind telling me the specifics? Izuku's fist tightened against his lap. I told him I would steal Quirk files, and analyze them in exchange for Kaken's Quirk. I see. Tamakawa softly nodded as he scribbled in his notepad. Aizawa's stare weighed on Izuku as he took a sip out of his lukewarm coffee. His slouch on the doorframe tightens as he stands up straight, a preamble to the question that lingered on his tongue. Why did you ask for the angry boy's Quirk? Tamakawa begins again delicately. Because I thought that if... Izuku's brows knit themselves together. If All for One can steal Quirks, maybe I could give his back. That's really brave of you, kid. Tamakawa's lips curl up. Does All Might know? A monotone voice adds. Izuku swallowed the lump in his throat. Why would he need to know? Izuku sheepishly looked at Aizawa, his heart plummeting to the depths of his stomach as he tugged at the collar of his jacket. He's the one who put the bastard behind bars. And how exactly is the kid supposed to work for All for One if he's been captured? I would assume he no longer has to worry about that burden on his back. That's why I'm asking Midoriya if he's told All Might. That guy knows something we don't, and I have a feeling the fight doesn't end here. Aizawa's eyes narrowed as he checked his watch. I have to go check in on Bakugo. You two continue, I'll be back. Izuku nods, and Tamakawa watches as Aizawa turns out towards the hallway. So, Midoriya, I'm gonna need you to tell me more intel on this deal. Are you deaf or some shit? I already told the story 5 times, screw off. Katsuki groaned as he crossed his arms. Kid, I need you to stop speaking in slang. Work with an old man here. Tsukachi palmed his face as he let out a deflated sigh. The door rattles as it slides open. How's it going? Aizawa raises a brow, tilting his head as he stands against the entryway. Tsukachi tosses his notepad onto the wooden coffee table, the one that stood between Bakugo and himself, then fumbles up from his stool. I've gotten the gist of it. Tsukachi's hand swings up to massage the side of his neck. He then turns back behind him, looking at Katsuki. But the kid refuses to stop speaking in all these slang terms. It's driving me crazy. This is normal language, Pops. Some of us aren't tucked into our deathbeds yet. Katsuki scoffs as he sinks further into the couch, crossing his arms as he manspreads, glaring at Tsukachi. Aizawa rolls his eyes at Katsuki, then lands back on Tsukachi. He rests his palm on his shoulder, then leans closer into his ear. Step out for a second, I'm gonna talk to him. Tsukachi nods as he begins to walk past Aizawa. His fingers cusp the door handle softly, shutting it with a click. A momentary silence cleanses the air. Aizawa then pans towards Katsuki. You're embarrassed, aren't you? Katsuki scoffs, his face souring at the line tossed at him. No, I'm not. Katsuki sharpens. That guy just failed his auditory test. Bakugo, your hearing is below average. Aizawa counters monotonously, crouching as he settles onto the stool, once previously occupied. Way to point out the obvious. Katsuki grumbled as he slipped his eyes off Aizawa. Bakugo. Katsuki remains silent. What's wrong? The stereotypical tiredness gets stripped from Aizawa's tongue. His words become laced with a delicate concern, one that dwells on your heart as it pleads to be poured out. Normally, you wouldn't reject cooperation. You're embarrassed of it, of what happened. Katsuki slams his fists against the couch cushions as he jumps up from his seat. I told him what happened, from start to the damn finish. I told him about how stupid Deku made me walk with him and the extras, how they did a sneak attack on us, how Deku recklessly tried to get me out of the damn marble prison, how he also got taken with me, how I got my quirk taken. He's the one not listening. The sound of Katsuki's tethered breath swallowed the room whole. Sit down. Aizawa breathed out. Let's talk about your quirk. Don't tell me what to do. Katsuki gritted out as his palms tightened. Then stand, I don't care. Aizawa shrugged as he watched Katsuki attempt to hold his composure. But as you're aware of, the absence of your quirk is going to cause you a few problems while being a hero course student. Katsuki freezes. Oh, great. So you're tossing me out of the hero course because I'm quirkless now? What a fucking joke! Katsuki's voice elevates as he shakes his head. Sit down. Aizawa raises firmly. You're not getting kicked out. Katsuki simply lets his vision focus on the tops of his shoes. The arrogance, the will to refuse fizzling away the deeper he sinks into his silent self-despair. For the meantime, until you get your quirk back, Principal Niza has suggested you study another course. You won't have to transfer out of 1A, you'll work more like an independent study because I'll still be your advisor. I didn't come to UA to mess around. I came here to be a hero. Katsuki grumbles. And how do you expect to do quirk training without a quirk? Aizawa counters. The ache in Katsuki's chest pulses. Oh. That's a low blow. Aizawa takes attention to the newfound crinkles on Katsuki's brows, the slight damp well along his waterline, the subtle breathlessness in his lungs. He then takes his fingers up towards the ridge of his nose, letting out a breath. Listen, I think you should join the support course for a bit. Katsuki peeks up, removing the sticky residue of the glue that stuck his gaze onto the ground. Technology is advancing at a speed we've never seen before. Support gadgets are said to function at the same level of quirks. Katsuki remains silent. You could learn a lot there, Bakugo. It's better than doing nothing. Aizawa begins to make his way back onto his feet, stopping before he reaches the doorframe. Think about it, it might be something you're interested in. Aizawa returns with Izuku at his side. Izuku then walks over to the couch, sitting opposite to the side Katsuki took over. Katsuki kept his chin buried in his hand, refusing to cooperate any further. If there's anything else we need, we'll contact the two of you. Aizawa then paused, and panned from an anxious Izuku over to a restless Katsuki. And if there's anything you two need, or want to talk about, don't hesitate to reach out to me. As Katsuki shuffled onto his feet, Aizawa called once more. Bakugo. Katsuki paused, tense. Consider it. What we talked about. Katsuki huffed as he slung his bag over his shoulders, storming out of the teacher's lounge, letting out a loud bang as he slammed the door shut. Izuku clutched his backpack in his chest, and stumbled up on his feet just as the door closed. Thank you all so much! Izuku spat out as he dashed out the doorway. It was impossible to even begin to articulate a thought without Katsuki embedded in it. His body manifested it into a tangible form. The rubber soles of Izuku's sneakers cinched the hallway tiles as he hunted Katsuki down, not wanting to let him go without an explanation for his sudden coldness. Katsuki was always angry, that was indefinite. Izuku had grown accustomed to Katsuki's attitude over the years, and throughout time gained the ability to differentiate Katsuki's moods masking behind his angry facade. The quickness in his movements, the sharpness in his glare, the aggressiveness bubbling into the ambience of the room. Something went wrong within the time of his investigation. If it was because of his quirk, Izuku now obtained the responsibility to take accountability, to keep tabs on Katsuki. Well, it was also the only excuse he had. Izuku picked up his feet as he ran faster and faster, almost activating one for all out of spite. Somehow, unfamiliar words, foreign feelings in his gut, washed through him. His palms tingled as they flickered like a flash fire, as flammable sweat dripped right into the center of them. The heaviness in his heart, and the urge to cleanse a newfound shame in his stomach became like a magnetic field, urging him to find Katsuki. Suddenly, he felt as if he was the only one in the entire world who understood what Katsuki felt like at this moment. The familiar hunched figure came into view as Izuku swung his torso over the edge of the stairwell. Kaken! Izuku called out breathlessly as he looked down into the stairwell, his voice echoing subtly. Katsuki ignores the call-out. Instead, he tugs his shoulder up, adjusting his bag as he continues his descent. Izuku races down the stairs. Kaken! Izuku calls again, letting the end of Katsuki's name drag out as he finally stands before him. Katsuki jumps back at the sudden appearance. His shoulder tense up as he digs his palms deeper within his pants pockets. What? Katsuki spits. Izuku loses to Katsuki's cold glare, sheepishly evading his eyes elsewhere. I was just wondering how the investigation went. They told me to keep on the down low, and that I probably have to work with them more because the league is still maybe, well probably, gonna try using the opportunity despite All for One being gone. And about how, actually. How about you? I got a little carried. None of your damn business. Katsuki returned as he stormed past Izuku. Izuku didn't hesitate to keep close behind Katsuki. Well, it's kinda our business. Izuku mumbled as he peeked at Katsuki, letting his eyes trace upon the nape of his neck. The two walk back in silence, within the rays of the descending sun. As Katsuki begins to walk up towards the dormitory, his steps quicken, as if the velocity of his body erupted. Right as Izuku is about to enter the dormitory, Katsuki slams the door on him. Izuku blinks as the surface shoves into his line of vision. The sound of collective whispering leaks through the walls, and that's when Izuku snaps out of it. He crinkles his eyebrows as he tugs harshly on the door handle, slamming it back open as he storms through the common area. The room goes silent once again, their classmates watching as tension fills the atmosphere. Izuku follows the sounds of stomping on the staircase, making his way to confrontation. Right as Katsuki clicks his door shut, Izuku begins to frantically knock. Kaken! What's wrong? Inside, Katsuki clicks his tongue as the banging, as well as the volume on Izuku's tongue, gets louder. Katsuki swings the door back open, almost bouncing the door screws out of the hinges. He then snags Izuku by the collar, pulling him in close with his right hand as he elevates his left. Stop that shit or I'm blowing your brains out. Katsuki pauses. It stings. His heart aches at the absence of his beloved Quirk. Izuku's eyes widened, knowing what Katsuki had brought upon himself. Katsuki then flings Izuku out of his way, and storms back into the cave of his room. Just as he's able to successfully click his door shut, Izuku rams his way into Katsuki's room. Get out! Katsuki snarls as he backs Izuku into a corner, back outside. Not until you tell me what happened at the interview. Fuck off! Katsuki clutches onto Izuku's forearm, squeezing into his skin. Something happened in Dash. It's none of your damn business. It kinda is my business. This whole thing is our business. Izuku pulls up against the clutch on his arm, leaning against the door in Katsuki's dorm room. Stop playing hero. You think we're all buddy-buddy now? Katsuki snickers as he slices at Izuku's heartstrings, attempting to evade Izuku's care yet again. Not exactly. But thought maybe you'd be willing to work with me here. Izuku gruffs as he steps toward Katsuki, with a stubborn willingness. In your dreams. Just please fucking work with me, damn it! Izuku's voice elevates as his chest becomes heavy, shaking his palms closely as fiery sparks pop out of them. Both Katsuki and Izuku freeze. Izuku then takes a step back, placing a hand onto his chest as he begins to observe his other palm. His eyes swipe from his hand up to Katsuki, looking at him with his lips dropped open, eyes wide, eyebrows raised. Katsuki blinks out of his paralysis. Where the hell did you learn that from? Izuku blinks, unamused. Kaken, I didn't mean to dash. I'm telling your mom, you dirty-mouthed bastard. Katsuki teases. Kaken! I'm serious. I don't cuss ever. Izuku's cheeks burn as he stumbles over his words, overwhelmed with the rapid mood shift. Yeah, I know. Katsuki's tone of voice becomes more firm, remembering the sparks that flew out of Izuku's palms as he lost his composure. It's weird, why does this keep happening? Izuku mumbles as he lifts his palms, observing them. Katsuki bobs his head up, watching Izuku as his eyebrows furrow together. What do you mean this keeps happening? Izuku lifts his gaze, locking eyes with Katsuki as the center of his palms begin to ache. He then huffs, looking to the side dismissively. Well, it's none of your business, right? Izuku shrugs, a smirk pinching up against his cheek as he suppresses it down. Deku, I swear dash. It's also my business now to know about what happened at the interview. We have to be on the same page. Izuku meets Katsuki's eyes, glistening with determination. We're the only ones who know exactly what happened that day. Kaken, we have to work together to fix this, to get your quirk back. You think I'm stupid? Of course I know this. Katsuki clicks his tongue. So then. Izuku lifts his brows, pointing his hand in Katsuki's direction, signaling him to begin. Katsuki disconnects his prolonged eye contact with Izuku, hunching his back over as he looks down at his feet. He lets the words simmer on his tongue, breathing in as he begins. Aizawa dash. The words falter, leaving him panicked. He clenches his fists, and retracts his heart from the conversation, pulling away to mask himself within his egotistical facade. I'm not doing this shit. This doesn't involve you. Did you not listen to what I said 2 seconds ago? Izuku pulls Katsuki back into his premise, clutching his wrist as if he'll be gone once he lets go. We both know what happened that day, so you know exactly what I told them. Katsuki's heart beats faster, causing his breathing to pick up its pace, his mind racing faster as his voice's volume elevates. That's not it. I know it isn't. Just leave me dash. You're sad about your quirk, aren't you? Izuku cries out, his voice cracking as he looks at Katsuki with soft, understanding, disgusting eyes. I already told you I don't need your goddamn pity! Katsuki yells as he swings his arm away, filing Izuku into his wall. Katsuki's ears begin to ring. He groans as he kneels down, digging into his ear as he pops his hearing aids out of his socket. They fumble down to the ground as Katsuki pulls his palms up to cradle his head, as if he was protecting himself with his shield of flesh. Izuku's voice fades out, and Katsuki closes his eyes as the world falls silent. Just before he lets the silence cradle his heavy heart, he's shaken back into reality by Izuku, whose mouth motions as if he's repeatedly calling Katsuki's name out. Katsuki stays put, blissfully watching as Izuku places his hearing aids back in his ear sockets ever so carefully. The ringing slowly fades to the velvet sound of Izuku's voice. Are you okay? Sorry, I should have asked before I dash. Katsuki clicks his tongue, returning to his persona as he soaks in the newfound embarrassment. I'm fine. Well, I'm not. And I don't think you are either. Izuku follows bluntly. He then shifts onto his bottom, letting his knees kiss Katsuki's. I keep feeling these random surges of anger. Whenever I feel them, my palms start hurting, like they're tearing apart. Izuku scratches the midsection of his palm. Earlier, it happened. It resulted in me using your quirk, and words I never use. Izuku turns away, embarrassed. Katsuki sneaks a glance at Izuku, watching him put his heart on his sleeve effortlessly. I don't want to do support course crap. I want to do hero stuff. Izuku's eyes pen back to Katsuki. Support course? I'm quirkless, so they want to put me in another department till I get my quirk back. What a pain in the ass. I lose my quirk, I become an extra overnight, and even if I do get my stupid quirk back, I'll have wasted all that time. Katsuki's gruff voice begins to tether away. He begins to dispose of his boastful, childlike, sparkly charm, entering the reality of what awaits him. And it shatters Izuku's heart. But you won't, Izuku mutters. You won't waste any time. You're already so far ahead of everyone. We're going to find a way to get it back to you, I already told you that. Katsuki stares at Izuku. And stares, and stares, and stares. Izuku stumbles onto his feet, clutching the door handle. Here, I'll be right back, don't lock me out. Just as Izuku disappears into the hallway, he quickly pokes his head through the door again. Kaken, like seriously, don't lock me out. I'll be right back. Katsuki remains on the wooden floor of his dorm room. The quick pleads from Izuku warmed the pouch of his stomach, implanting a smile upon his lips. The sound of the doorknob churning within Izuku's grasp brought Katsuki out of his dreamlike state. He watched as Izuku peeked through the door, as if he was expecting Katsuki to no longer be present, and lit up the moment his eyes met with the figure before him. Izuku held on to one of those hero notebooks he carries around everywhere. It was burnt, crisp at the edges. The paper didn't sit nicely either, as if it had settled into a shape resembling ragged sandstone. This time, Izuku took a seat next to Katsuki. Their shoulders knocked together as Izuku settled in. Katsuki remains silent as he watches Izuku, primarily because he'd already embarrassed himself enough in a day. Izuku flutters the notebook open, his hand flipping to a certain page. So, I've actually thought about this in the past. Not this situation. Just like, the possibility of it, and sorry. I'll just get to the point. Izuku nudges the notebook in Katsuki's direction, letting him observe the countless drawings and bullet points and tedious details regarding the possibility of creating a support item that functions like Katsuki's quirk. You mentioned something about joining another department, right? So I thought that maybe, if you wanted to, of course, you could make something like this. Just in the meantime, though. Just until you get your quirk back. And then maybe you won't think of yourself as falling behind, and maybe even keep being in the hero course. Izuku searches for a reaction on Katsuki's blank face. He swallows a lump in his throat, picking at his collar as he begins to break a nervous sweat. So, what do you think? Katsuki turns towards Izuku. He raises an eyebrow playfully, suppressing the crease of his lips. This is creepy as hell, you know that, right? Well, our classmates don't think so. You do this for the extras too? You're such a stalker. Katsuki teases as he flips through the notebook. Izuku lets the blood in his face simmer as he watches Katsuki's fingers tousle through his notebook. That's not important. So, do you like it or not? How do you plan on supporting my body weight with this tiny thing? Katsuki mumbles. Izuku's eyes glisten like fresh ripples in a lake. After many tedious interviews, hassled investigations, and gaining custody of various villains, students were finally permitted to travel off school grounds. Amused, Class 1A hurried to create plans full of festivities due to the local summer festival. Todoroki planned to use that time to go see his mother. He'd worked up the confidence to finally face her prior to their field trip, resulting in frequent visits with her. Ochako hurried to buy a train ticket back home, eager to see her parents. Ida's brother arranged plans to spend time with him, finally free after his packed schedule due to his hero work. With the wide talk of plans flourishing in their dorm's common area, Izuku took initiative to make his, too. Later that Friday evening, Izuku sat slumped on his bed. His fingers traveled along the digital keyboard, typing in different variations of the same text message to send to his mother. The school has been in complete lockdown, thus causing parents to remain stationed until the school contacts them. Izuku grumbled, rolling around along his comforter, attempting to formulate a conversation that wouldn't stress his worrywart mother out. Deku! A muffled, whiny voice leaked in through the hinges of his dorm room. Izuku sprang onto his feet, stumbling towards the door. What's up? Izuku stiffened, his fingers reaching towards his neck, fidgeting. It's not that the Katsuki was scary, not in the slightest. Rather, the memories of their heart-to-hearts, their spurs of the moment, made it a little harder to lock eyes with Katsuki. It made him self-conscious. Katsuki tilted his head, confused at the lack of stability in their eye contact. Instead of prying, he just brushes it off and continues his statement. You, me, Hero Museum, tomorrow, 11 a.m. He then shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, nicking the fabric pills. Izuku shoots his head up, confused. Assuming to connect with Katsuki's eyes, Izuku looks right at him, only to find Katsuki's evading in the other direction. Where? Wait, what? Izuku shakes his head, assuming he'd heard wrong. Katsuki swiped his head back in Izuku's direction, the pair finally meeting eyes. Why, you heard me! All I heard was, like 5 words. Yeah, now process it, dimwit! Izuku slices his hair with the creases of his fingers, collecting his breath. Museum tomorrow? Why am I going? The project, dumbass! Don't tell me you were thinking of slacking off this weekend? I was going to see my mom this weekend, that's not slacking off. Katsuki rolled his eyes back, teasing. Yeah, whatever. Seeing Auntie, slacking off, excuses. Izuku grumbled in defeat, then lit up in remembrance. Kaken! Katsuki lifted a brow as he pushed himself off Izuku's doorway, no longer leaning against it. What? Your number. I don't have it. Can I have it? Wait, let me get my phone. Izuku hurried back into his room, digging around his bed comforter as he looked for his phone, buried deep inside. As Izuku fetched his phone, Katsuki let his eyes wander around Izuku's dorm room. All Might merchandise infiltrated every corner of his room, causing the primary color scheme All Might marketed himself to pop, contrasting against the pale wall. As he continued scanning, he couldn't help but suppress a smirk along his lips. His eyes then drifted back to the wondering Izuku, looking intently at his broad shoulders. Katsuki quickly turned away as Izuku scrambled back over to him, dismissing his prior thoughts. Instead, he dug into his back pocket, fishing out his phone. Izuku nudged his phone towards Katsuki, waiting for the trade. Katsuki's gaze trailed from Izuku's hands, then eyes. He put out both of his hands, once for giving his phone to Izuku, the other to receive Izuku's phone. Within the silence of imputing each other's phone numbers, Katsuki broke it first. I thought you'd be jumping at the thought of visiting the museum, nerd. Izuku chuckled, keeping his eyes on Katsuki's phone. I am, swear on that one. The chuckle tainted a newfound smile on Izuku's face, his eyes slanting as his cheeks compressed upwards onto the socket. I've just got a lot on my mind, I guess. Izuku shrugged, tiptoeing over yet another heart-to-heart. Katsuki peeks up at Izuku, unable to muster a word of comfort. Instead, he sinks his head back down towards Izuku's phone, and lets his cheekiness take over on the keyboard. Izuku continues, lightening up the mood as they exchange phones once more. But I am excited to go, and do our project, of course. Izuku then raises a brow at the name Katsuki had assigned himself as in his contacts, and lets out a giggle. King Explosion? Very you, Kaken. Why'd you put your whole damn government name? You weirdo. Katsuki leans once more on the doorframe, pushing his cheek against it as he meets Izuku's eyes. What did you want me to put? Deku? Were you gonna type Kaken into mine as well? Izuku's brows raise, indulging deeper into the banter. Katsuki remains silent, checkmated as he shrugs. I dunno, you'll probably change it to that anyways because your pea-brain can't remember squat, Mr. Izuku Midoriya. Izuku's heart rattled into his sternum, jumping at the name that sounded foreign from Katsuki's tongue. Kaken, that's because you didn't say the words clearly. That's a lack of communication from your side. Now you're just spewing nonsense. Whatever you say, King Explosion. Izuku didn't hesitate to giggle, bobbing his shoulders up and down as his toothy smile illuminates the room. Katsuki, however, snickers towards the ground, hiding his upturned lips with his knuckles. Now dash! Just as Katsuki opened his mouth to continue the conversation at Izuku's door, Kirishima and Kaminari raced over to him. Bakugo! We need help! The two boys cry out as they clutch his shoulders, attempting to persuade him. Katsuki jumps from the sudden contact, then pivots to face them, clutching their scalps in each of his palms. He glares at them, as if he was bloodthirsted. Want to die? We're sorry! Kaminari drags out. But this is super-duper urgent. It's about the thing from the other day. You know. Kaminari and girls. Girls? Izuku lifts a brow. Girls have always avoided Kaken since we were kids, you might want to find someone dash. Do I have to drill a hole in your brain? I told you, I don't do wasting time. You want to date someone or something? Is that what this is ABO dash? Kaminari quickly shoves everyone into Izuku's dorm room, his body sliding down the door just as he slammed it closed. Guys! Kaminari whispers harshly, putting his index finger upon his lips. Keep it down! She was right there! Katsuki and Izuku give each other a look, then focus back on Kaminari. Izuku shifts from his fallen position into crisscross on the floor. Who is it? Kaminari opens his mouth, but his words die on his tongue as his cheeks boil into a burning maroon. He then glanced at Kirishima, signaling him to reveal it. Kirishima looks to the pair waiting, and begins. It's Jairu. He's, well, how do I say this nicely? I get second-hand embarrassment watching him interact with her. Hey! I'm trying alright? Kaminari calls out. And you're asking me? Bakugo deadpans. And you're asking Kakin? Izuku points in Katsuki's direction. You little punk! Katsuki turns over to Izuku, and locks his neck into his elbow as he ruffles his hair. You're my last hope, man, please! Kaminari claps his hands together as he shuts his eyes. I really don't want to act like an idiot and mess this up. As Izuku remains headlocked in Katsuki's arms, he puts a finger to his chin. I think it's okay to stay like you are. Kirishima and Katsuki turn towards the trapped Izuku. Like an idiot? Katsuki spits bluntly. That's not what I meant. I mean, if she likes you too, wouldn't she like you because of the way you are? My mom and I used to watch these soap operas, and I know using these as a source is a little, well, unreliable, but I think just telling her would work. Telling her? Not in a million years. Kaminari deflates back into the door, hopeless. It's the only choice you have, man. Kirishima finds his way to pat Kaminari's back. And you guys think I'm gonna ask her to hang out alone? Not a chance. Izuku squirms around in Katsuki's headlock. In response, Katsuki squeezes Izuku back into his paralytic jail. But doesn't she like you too? I mean, if I knew the girl I liked also liked me back, I think I would tell her. Kirishima shrugs. Yeah, but no! What if they're all just mixed signals and I'm just plain wrong about it all? Kaminari palms shudder outwards. If Jairu's sending you mixed signals, it's probably because she also likes you, dunce face. Katsuki adds. The collective goes silent, confusion lacing the group atmosphere. That doesn't make any sense, though? Izuku begins, his cheek still resting on Katsuki's forearm. If you like someone, wouldn't it be obvious? I mean, why send mixed signals? Maybe if they don't like the person enough dash. Kirishima adds. Don't even put that into the air, man. You're gonna curse me. Kaminari yanks on Kirishima's arm, squeezing it tightly. Because, Katsuki begins, flustered as he spotlights himself. Because you just do? I don't know. Katsuki releases Izuku from his headlock, pushing him away as he stumbles on his words. Are you saying you've got experience? Kirishima teases. No. What the hell? So you like someone dash? Kaminari adds. No. Not in a million years. Katsuki's voice practically trembles the ground. I said I don't. Get out. Katsuki jumps on his feet and clutches onto the collar of Kirishima and Kaminari's shirts, and yanks them out, shutting the door behind them. Izuku remains seated on the wooden floor, staring a hole into the back of Katsuki's head. Katsuki slowly turns around. I forgot this wasn't my dorm. Katsuki mumbles as his hands sink into his pockets. Izuku continues staring. Then, bluntly, do you like me? Katsuki loses his ability to speak, and his heart ejects into overdrive. Quickly, Izuku snaps out of his haze, and begins to swing his palms around in the air, flustered, as he clarifies. Oh my gosh, not like that! I meant it as in when you were talking about giving people mixed signals and not being able to explain it, but it also meant you still like them. Actually, I'm just gonna stop dash. Oh you! Katsuki interrupts under his breath. Yeah. Katsuki continues. It's you. I was talking about you. Katsuki and Izuku simmer in the silence of their processings, staring at each other's rosy cheeks, attentive eyes, listening to the sound of each other's breath pulsing, echoing through Izuku's bedroom chamber. Izuku swallows a lump in his throat. So are we? Quietly, collecting his cluttered voice. Am I your friend? Katsuki slides his tongue over his teeth as he breathes in, his heart racing out of his chest at the exposing vulnerability. You think I just make myself miserable by hanging around you? Katsuki utters, his eyes coming up from the ground, peeking up towards Izuku as his hands become humid like rubber. Hard to tell, don't you think? Izuku's lips taut up as his eyes chase after Katsuki's lowered gaze. Katsuki remained silent, defeated by Izuku's upper hand in the investigation he began by exposing himself. Whatever. You better not be late tomorrow, Mr. Izuku Midoriya. Katsuki mumbles as he runs his palm over Izuku's doorknob. Izuku remains seated on his dorm floor, watching the sight of Katsuki's reddened nape reveal itself under his lightbulb spotlight. I won't! Izuku jumps onto his knees, his chest tight with euphoria as he watches Katsuki close the door. The sensation runs through his veins, and in response, illuminated sparks fuse from his clammy hands, the smell of burnt caramel radiating off of them. They fuse like microscopic fireworks. Izuku watches closely, monitoring the sparks as they light up his room. Once the sensation dims, Izuku rubs the excess sweat off his hand, and grabs his hero notebook. He flips to Katsuki's section, clicking his pen as he reaches it. He begins to write. Quirk activated when feelings are at a high. Katsuki and Izuku stand side by side on the concrete front porch right outside the dormitory. Buckets of water fall from the sky, hitting against the concrete slabs like shooting stars, practically bouncing. A summer monsoon had come up on them. Izuku blinked, clutching his messenger bag tossed over his shoulder. He knew it was raining. He'd woken up to the songs of the wind, lullings against the calla lilies Yayorosa had planted in the community garden right outside their dormitory. Droplets of rain trickled at his bare skin, regretting his quick choice of his cargo denim shorts and a white tee. He tugged at his bucket hat, his only choice of reasonable fashion considering the weather. He then glanced to his right, over at Katsuki peering at the walk ahead of them, almost in dread. Katsuki rocked his usual all-black outfit, only this time, came prepared with a wind puffer jacket, and an umbrella held closely in his hand. Are we still going? Izuku began. Katsuki turned towards Izuku. I'm out here, aren't I? Katsuki replies as he shrugs, knitting his eyebrows slightly. With a shudder, Katsuki slid his umbrella open and swiped it up above his head. The rubber sole of his Converse squeaks as he descends down the shallow steps. Katsuki strides through the rain, letting the pangs of raindrops clog his eardrums. Unsure if it was the rain drowning out the sloppy steps belonging to the boy behind him, or just his defective hearing, but Katsuki couldn't hear anyone trailing behind him. He twirled back around at the bottom of the dormitory porch. Izuku stood, still stuck at the top, contemplating a solution to the wash of rain that prophesied amongst him. Izuku flinched at Katsuki's attention, chuckling awkwardly. Sorry, I'm coming! The drabble of water against Izuku's bucket hat quickly streamed down to his shoulders, burdening the already heavy load of raindrops falling upon him as he hurried down to Katsuki. It was only a few moments of Izuku walking ahead of Katsuki, isolating himself in the rain, before Katsuki yanked at Izuku's shirt collar and dragged him into his umbrella's perimeter. Izuku held his breath, his eyes and stiff body language speaking for him as he brushed up against Katsuki's chest. Katsuki's fingers ushered under the damp fabric amongst Izuku's lower neck. And what exactly was your plan for when we actually got to the museum? Ask the janitor to mop you dry at the entrance? Or are we gonna have to ask for cleanup on aisle 5 while we get you another shirt? Katsuki's eyebrow perks up, his fingers remaining their burning graze against Izuku's neck. Izuku pivoted on his feet, and oh gosh. The lack of personal space Izuku left him was nauseating, no. Stomach-churning, repulsing? Katsuki couldn't point his finger on it. But whatever, it was probably because he wasn't accustomed to being this close with his friends, he concluded. As Katsuki dabbled in his thoughts, Izuku went to grab Katsuki's hand, clasping it with both of his, fascinated. Your hands, they're really warm even though you don't have your quirk. Wow, I mean, was that ever an effect from your quirk? I'd assume you'd always have a higher body temperature than the average person, but it might have just been genetic after all. With every movement Izuku took forward, Katsuki moved that distance back. Eventually, the rain began sprinkling the outer periphery of Katsuki's hair, thus causing Katsuki to push both himself and Izuku back into the umbrella. Okay. I get it. Now keep walking, you bastard. Katsuki yielded, his hand now pushing down at Izuku's damp bucket hat as they began walking again. But really, is it genetic or is it from your quirk? Izuku resisted against the strong grasp Katsuki held over him, remaining curious. Genetic, damn it! Katsuki yelled, creating yet more rambling from Izuku, who was kept captive, hunched over Katsuki's palm. The walk to the train station remained full of back and forth cheeky banter. They, however, were cut off after an elderly man gave them a good scolding on the train. The two slowly cranked their eyes to the others, making direct eye contact, as well as an agreement to hold off on the banter until they arrived at the next stop. As they arrived, they skipped out of the train cart, hurrying up the steps. Izuku turned once more at the top, checking to see if the old man was anywhere near. Geez, I was surprised at how aggressive that elderly man was. Katsuki dug his hands in his pocket once again, nodding in agreement, as ironic as it may seem, as the two walked toward the sprinkled sidewalk. Just as Katsuki's hand navigated their way to his umbrella, Izuku interrupted. I don't think I'll need the umbrella. I mean, it's only sprinkling, and the museum is barely a 5-minute walk from here. Izuku waved his hands at Katsuki, a signal to keep the umbrella within his premises. You're already like a wet dog. I'm not about to get rejected into the museum just because you look like you just took your clothes out of the wash. Katsuki rebuked as he popped open his umbrella. I'll be fine, Great, now I gotta dry you off, Katsuki opened his palm and angled it upwards, as if he was starting a fire amongst the flesh of his hands. Just as he did, the two went silent, and his hand dangled there between them like a carcass. Katsuki slips his hand back into his pocket, his gaze glued onto Izuku's shoes. Sorry. Izuku lulls. Normally, Katsuki would have lashed out at Izuku. He would have scorned Izuku's gentle eyes, his hushed voice, his velvet tongue. He would have accused him of pitiful, performative sympathy. He would have pushed him far out of his heart, farther than anyone. However, this time Katsuki knew taunting him with remorse wasn't the intent of the apology. He, now, had discovered it never was the intent. The apology manifested from the pile of guilt Izuku had scattered around in parts of his room, sectors of his mind, in places no one could possibly find them, or even begin to unravel them, much less help him carry it. Katsuki could see, Izuku was drowning in his guilt, and he didn't even know it. Izuku carried Katsuki's dream in the palm of his hand, metaphorically and physically. And that was why maybe, just maybe, Katsuki could carry some of Izuku's guilt in his palm too. He'd be willing to search for it in the clutter hiding Izuku's true feelings, because Izuku needed someone to take initiative first, because otherwise he'd never ask. He knows that without Izuku protecting his quirk, his hopes, his dreams, all for one would have sucked them dry. To claim Izuku had stolen his quirk would be a false accusation. Izuku would never use someone else's losses for his own gain, because that's the type of person he was. That characteristic frustrated Katsuki at times, because Izuku always put others before himself, even when they'd fallen below him. Why did Izuku insist on sharing the burdens of others, but holding his own with his own strength? Why was Izuku so painfully patient and understanding? And why did Izuku hold on to Katsuki's dream like it was his own, despite the fact that he's treated him like a dead weight their entire lives? Despite the questions racing in his mind, all Katsuki could do was this. Stop apologizing, it's getting annoying, you know. Katsuki took a few steps forward, stopping just as he entered the rain. And I'm not mad at you, so stop torturing yourself over that's not your fault. Without wanting to look at Izuku's face, Katsuki begins walking once again, paying mind to the sound of Izuku's footsteps tailing behind him as reassurance to keep walking. Did Izuku smile at his words? Maybe he raised his eyebrows at Katsuki, denying the truth of his statement out of his own guilt. Maybe his face stayed nervously neutral, not wanting to validate his statement, not deny it out of guilt that drowned him. Then, it looks like we're just gonna have to make a run for it. Izuku sped in front of Katsuki, his body slicing through the sky's teardrops. Katsuki released the breath he didn't even know he was holding, lifting the edges of his lips as he closed his umbrella. You cheater! You got a head start. Katsuki's eyebrows stiffened amongst his eyelids as he watched Izuku press himself onto the glass display. Inside? All Might's hero costume belt from one of his previous eras. Are you done yet? Katsuki groaned as he stood lazily with his hands in his pocket. Izuku shooed his hand towards Katsuki, his cheeks still squashed against the glass. Just 5 more minutes and I promise Dash. It's been half an hour and we've barely looked around. Get on with it. Katsuki clamps Izuku's inner arm with his hand, and begins dragging him away. Protesting, Izuku uses his words and lets himself be pulled through the Grand Museum hallway. But Kaken, you can't deny you were enjoying it too. I mean, the way you looked at Dash. I brought you here to look at other damn heroes. If you spend your time looking at All Might, we won't get any new ideas for the project, you moron. Katsuki rolls his eyes, clutching Izuku tighter. Izuku brings his finger up to the side of his temple, scratching it as he laughs stiffly. You don't have to worry about that, because I've already taken notes on all the exhibits here. Katsuki blinks at his response, then slowly turns towards him. His mouth, already open in disbelief, begins to spew words of frustration. Then what the hell did we, Dash? He then looks out tall glass windows of the museum, a large pond stretching out the entire back side, as well as a small island of land isolated in the center. There stood a large, silver, statue of a hero. Izuku only mentioned being familiar with everything inside the museum. He never said anything outside the museum. Katsuki's smirk lit up, and began dragging Izuku back down the hallway, searching for a doorway out. He ignored whatever questions Izuku shot at him, asking where they were headed to. He'd also ignored the museum staff asking him to slow down. Finally, hidden at the side of the museum, he'd found an exit that led to the backyard pond. Rain sprinkled down onto the two of them as Katsuki pulled Izuku further, luring him to the edge of the pond. Releasing him, he finally turns to look at Izuku, paying him mind after ignoring him. Hi, are we, Dash? I'm gonna show you an exhibit you've never seen, you nerd. Katsuki begins slipping off his shoes, letting the inner sole hang within the clasp of his fingers, and he proceeds to carry them. Izuku looks over his shoulder, then back at Katsuki, worried. Kaken, I don't think this is allowed. Katsuki, smirking mischievously, begins to step into the shallow water. Stupid Deku, the greatest things in life are only found when you go beyond your limits. Katsuki grabs Izuku by his collar, not giving him a choice to whether or not to give in to peer pressure. Just as Izuku takes his first step into the pond, the water swallows his rubbery shoes whole. With every glide across the water he takes, with every pull Katsuki inflicts onto him, his shoes become more and more like sponges as they heave more and more water. This has nothing to do with going beyond limits, Izuku exclaims as he slides his palms onto Katsuki's arm as they continue to plow through, freeing himself from the collar Katsuki had on him. Limits of Dash. Katsuki breathes heavily as he slices through the water now up to his knees. Restriction. So yes, smartass, it does. Izuku holds Katsuki's filinging wrist tighter, using him as a motor to help against the weight of his shoes. Oh, whatever. You know, I already know about this statue, right? Izuku's eyebrows crumble together as he tilts his head closer behind Katsuki, craning his neck out as he rebukes Katsuki's actions. No you don't, because you haven't touched it. Katsuki yanks the arm Izuku held forward in an attempt to shake him off, but Izuku doesn't budge. Izuku yanks Katsuki's arm back. Since when was Dash? The museum sirens begin whining, halting Izuku and Katsuki's banter as they finally reach the isolated piece of land inside the museum's pond. The two silence as they meet eyes. As they stare freely at the other, Izuku watches Katsuki's face mold into blank worry, his eyes occupying no thoughts, a mouth frozen in the last syllable of his realization. Before Izuku could look back at the bundle of employees gathering around the pond perimeters, Katsuki wastes no time to pull himself onto land. The water slowly shallows once again, and his pace increases. Izuku, not being able to keep up with his velocity due to all the extra weight he carries, spongy shoes, mop of hair, heavy bag, his grip on Katsuki's wrist finally falls. Katsuki runs his fingers through his hair, slicking his hair back as he regains his grip on the situation at hand. He then hops as he slips his shoes back on quietly, avoiding letting his eyes land on Izuku, not wanting to admit guilt to the trouble he brought upon the two of them. Izuku watches Katsuki as they bathe in not only the rain, but also in the siren's echoes. Sternly, "Ka dash!" Just as Izuku begins, he's cut off by a sudden laser slicing just past him. The beam bounces off the statue like a mirror, only to fall onto the ground. The laser then shapelifts into handcuffs. Izuku wastes no time to clutch Katsuki's wrist once again, and activates One for All. As if his veins began illuminating, his power begins to diffuse through his skin, manifesting a binding between his wrist and Katsuki's, wielding himself to him. Just as Izuku crouches down as he lets his calves concentrate the power flowing through him, he makes subtle eye contact with Katsuki, and squeezes his wrist in reassurance, or doubt, Katsuki couldn't tell. Like a cannonball, the two shoot across the water in the blink of an eye, and disappear into the forest. They now surf through the mud, dodging the trees as they speed through. Just as Izuku assumes they've made it, a downhill worth of terror approaches amongst them. Izuku digs his rubber heels into the dirt as a last-effort attempt to halt his godlike speed, but ultimately pulls through useless against the mire soil. The whiplash from his attempted brakes cause him to topple over as he begins his descent, completely bliss to letting Katsuki go. Thus, Katsuki topples down with him. They groan and hiss at every collision they face as they tumble down, dirtying themselves with scrapes, mud, and aches. At their relief, the fall finally ends, and their bodies are thrashed into the water bank present at the very bottom. Izuku shoots up first, gasping for air, spitting out the dirt he'd eaten while being dragged downhill. He then turns to his side, looking to see if Katsuki was okay. Katsuki's torso slowly elevates upwards, his palm at the side of his temple. Izuku's eyes widened as he unconsciously shot his hand up to assist. "Are you hurt?" "It's just a scratch." Katsuki shrugs, still not able to meet eyes with Izuku. Through the flesh shields Katsuki had hidden his wound under, crimson blood begins leaking through the cracks of his fingers. Izuku yanks Katsuki's hand away, revealing the sliced wound. Not too deep, but enough to create bloodshed. "You're bleeding." "It's literally just a scratch." Katsuki banters back. "If you're bleeding here, that means your head got hit, meaning you could have concussion or maybe even more injuries along the back of dash." "I'm fine." Katsuki cuts Izuku off sternly, wiping the trail of blood as he tumbles to finally stand up amongst the soft tide of the riverbank. Just as Izuku croaks another word, Katsuki grabs his wrists and pulls him up, grabbing the soaked bag on his shoulders and putting it over his own. Katsuki tweaks open his bag, pretending to adjust it on his body as he peeks at Izuku's now soggy and dirty hero notebooks. He swallows a salty lump in his throat, then turns his gaze away from Izuku once more as he begins his groggy reclamation of responsibility. "I'm sorry." Izuku's ears perk up, his face twisting up, a smile snapping into place. "For what?" he questions, Katsuki unsure of whether or not he's being oblivious on purpose or out of genuine bliss. "I'm sorry, I wanted to see that stupid statue so bad, okay?" Katsuki crosses his arms as his tone becomes more stubborn after Izuku's seemingly teasing comment. "I mean, I guess it was worth it." Izuku shrugs as he digs into his pocket. Katsuki watches, finally. Izuku pulls out the handcuffs blasted at the two of them from earlier. "That security guy had an amazing quirk. He shot the cuffs at us, and from that I'd assume they somehow cuff either one of us if the laser had hit us. I mean, wow. I'd love to know if he can do this with other objects, or even what his quirk even is. Man. Too bad we got into trouble. I could have asked him if I'd known." Izuku places his fisted fingers against his lip, his thumb holding his chin as he contemplates the scene from earlier. Izuku, unfazed by the rain, rambles and rambles, his voice never once wavering despite Katsuki's ringing ears. The white shirt Izuku had worn was now spotted brown, resembling a slice of tiramisu. His hair stuck flat like a wet dog, appearing longer than usual. all this chaos, and Izuku could only reminisce on the quirk a random security agent had. It humored Katsuki. Katsuki slipped his hand underneath Izuku's bangs, pushing them back with an undertone of uncertainty. His body had moved on his own, putting his skin on Izuku's. They never did that. Despite his worries, Katsuki's lips twirled into a smirk, and his eyes creased as he began ruffling Izuku's hair. "You're such a weird bastard,"